Westerville, Ohio, a peaceful city where the streets are tree-lined. In that small community, Emily Noble is known as a small but strong woman, a soul who loves nature, loves silence, and has always overcome all the losses in her life. Those around her see in Emily a rare resilience, a person who has lost friends, lost parent, lost a husband, but never lost faith in life. But in May 2020, Emily's life took a turn no one could have imagined. She disappeared the morning after her 52nd birthday. Her car, phone, and wallet were all still at home. 4 months later, her body was discovered hanging from a tree. Emily Noble, age 52, lived in Westerville, a peaceful suburb near Columbus, Ohio. She had worked for the state of Ohio's Medicaid office for over 10 years. As the main income provider, she had around $96,000 in personal savings. However, Emily's identity was not defined by her financial status. Emily was only 5 feet tall and weighed under 100 pounds. She had osteopenia, a condition that made her bones more fragile than average. Friends described her as lively, free-spirited, brave, and always smiling. She shared a special bond with her sister, Amy. Emily loved nature and often foraged for edible plants in the woods near her home. Every morning, she posted sunrise photos on Facebook. She was known for taking long, peaceful walks through her neighborhood. She treasured quiet moments and the space to think, but Emily's life had been marked by loss. In the 1,990 seconds, she witnessed several close friends die from AIDS. Her father suffered a catastrophic accident. He slipped, fell, hit his head, and never recovered. Less than a year later, her mother died in a car crash. She inherited her mother's condo on Abbey Cross Lane in Westerville, an 800-square-foot home that became her refuge. In 1983, Emily broke her nose in a fall, an injury that would become forensically relevant decades later, and in 2011, her first husband died by end his life. Emily had a history of depression. She sought therapy throughout her life, but her friends all said the same thing. She always pushed through. She always found her way back. After her first husband's death, Emily joined a dating site called Plenty of Fish, where she met Matthew Moore. At the time, he was living in Las Vegas and working in the casino industry. They married in 2018, and Moore moved to Ohio with his teenage son, Joey. From a previous marriage, Moore's past was complicated. His ex-wife, Lisa Peterson, later testified about an incident on New Year's Day, 2001, just 3 months into their marriage. She said Moore choked her while she was pregnant. They argued, and he suddenly put his hands around her neck. She said it was the only time he ever physically harmed her. They divorced in 2006. They had 2 children together. One of them died young. Though the cause was never publicly disclosed, Moore's mother died in 2018, and he placed his inheritance into a joint account with Emily. Their combined balance exceeded $400,000. Then, in the summer of 2019, tragedy struck yet again. Moore's 17-year-old son, Joey, died by end his life by hanging in a park not far from their home. It devastated Moore. Moore's therapy notes expressed deep concern for his mental health after Joey's death, but there were no allegations of violence. By May 2020, the global health issues had changed their lives. Moore was unemployed. Emily continued working, still carrying the financial weight of the household. There were tensions in the marriage. Text messages revealed arguments about Moore's drinking, his mood, and name-calling. One message stood out. Emily said she was afraid to go home. Yet Moore also sent messages encouraging her urging her to stay hopeful. When he asked whether she wanted a divorce, she never said she did. Friends noticed troubling signs. Suzanne Kavanagh saw bruises on Emily's arm. The last time they met, she raised concerns about the relationship, which ultimately strained their friendship. Emily had also stopped wearing her wedding ring before she disappeared. Yet, despite all these signs, Emily seemed to be improving. She was transitioning back to full-time work. She was, as always, finding her way through. May 24, 2020, was Emily's 52nd birthday. That morning, she and Moore drove to Buckeye Lake to collect water from a natural spring. They returned to Westerville, stopped by the Field of Heroes Memorial, and had a small picnic in the park. The global health issues restrictions had just eased, and bars were reopening. To celebrate, they decided to go bar hopping in downtown Westerville. Their first stop was the Cobalt Grill restaurant, where they took selfies together. Bartender Jessica served them around 7 o'clock p.m. They were her only customers. They stayed for roughly 45 minutes and told her they were continuing their birthday outing. They left around 7:30 p.m. Their neighbor, John, later said he saw Emily at home sometime around 8 o'clock p.m. According to Moore's account, they returned home, went to bed, and he slept in the guest room so he wouldn't disturb her. User activity on Emily's phone stopped after 6 o'clock p.m. On May 24, Moore, meanwhile, had a 30-minute phone call with a friend just after 7:30 p.m. His phone showed uninterrupted user activity until 6 o'clock a.m. The next morning, May 25, 2020, Moore claimed he slept until about 10 o'clock a.m. When he woke up, Emily was gone. Left behind were her car in the driveway, her keys, her phone, her wallet, her credit cards, everything. At 2:47 p.m., Moore used Emily's phone to call her friend, asking if she had seen her. Shortly afterward, he filed a missing person report with the Westerville Police Department. Officer Robert Hollis responded, and his body camera footage captured the entire interaction. Both cars were there. Nothing immediately suggested foul play, but Detective Steve Grubbs later admitted that his instincts were triggered. Something about Moore's version of events felt wrong. Within hours, hundreds of volunteers gathered at Westerville North High School to help search. Multiple agencies joined in. The FBI, state police, Caminos Nina units, dive teams, bloodhounds, and cadaver dogs searched the condo area, the neighborhood, and the western woodline. Dogs tracked along the road near the condo and the bike path, but there was a crucial mistake. The area where Emily's body would eventually be found was never searched. Police Chief Charles Chandler later told the media that the area had been searched 3 times. This was not true. Moore's behavior during the search struck many as unusual. He claimed he had shown flyers at 2 Black Lives Matter rallies, yet Emily's family said he refused to join any organized search efforts. Eventually, he stopped cooperating with police altogether. Then, in September 2020, Moore contacted producers of the Vanished podcast, pleading for Emily's case to be featured. The episode aired that month. Both producers and listeners found Moore's interview extremely odd. When asked to describe Emily, Moore said he never saw her weigh herself, that she was tiny, like 100. He described her legs, her arms, her posture, and said she was, anatomically, a really pretty lady. He made strange comments about her facial expressions. Podcast researcher Amanda Coleman later said Moore said things to her that she had never heard in any interview before. The interview raised red flags. On Wednesday, September 16, 2020, 3 local women were foraging in a wooded area west of Emily and Moore's condo, just off County Line Road. Less than half a mile from the home, it was a place Emily frequently visited to forage for edible plants. That's when they saw it. skeletal remains. Suspended from the branch of a honeysuckle tree, a 20-inch black plastic USB cord was wrapped around the neck and tied to the branch above. When the remains arrived at the Montgomery County Coroner's Office at 2:08 a.m. on September 17, they weighed only 18 pounds. X-rays and photographs were taken. The remains were described as skeletonized with only minimal mummified tissue. On September 22, dental records confirmed the body was Emily Noble. Police Chief Chandler called the case highly unusual. A black water bottle lay beside Emily's left leg, filled with a peach-colored liquid containing 6% alcohol. Her engagement ring and wedding band were also placed next to her left leg. She had removed them. Her right hand was gripping her right ankle. Her left arm rested downward. With her hand touching the water bottle, she was dressed in black Old Navy leggings, a black spaghetti-strap tank top, a white Old Navy long-sleeved shirt that had slipped down around her waist, and trainers. An e-cigarette was tucked into the pocket of her leggings. The USB cord and other items recovered at the scene tested negative for DNA. On October 2, 2020, the remains were transported to Ohio State University. Dr. Amanda Agnew and a graduate student in the OSU Skeletal Biology Research Lab conducted additional analysis. Their report, completed on January 11, 2021, identified 4 fractures in the hyoid bone, fractures in the nasal cavity, and several missing toe bones. A portion of the hyoid bone was also absent. The injuries were determined to be perimortem, occurring at or near the time of death, or postmortem. 10 days later, the Montgomery County coroner ruled the cause of death as multiple injuries to the face and neck, but the case didn't take its decisive turn until May 27, 2021. Dr. Bill Smock issued his findings. Dr. Smock, a forensic physician and strangulation expert, produced the report that became the centerpiece of the prosecution's theory. He concluded that Emily had been manually strangled. The 4 fractures in her throat, he said, combined with facial fractures caused by blunt force trauma, indicated her death had been staged to resemble a hanging. In his opinion, the evidence was consistent with homicide. However, Dr. Smock was not a board-certified forensic pathologist. He was an emergency medicine doctor who had completed a 1-year clinical forensic medicine fellowship in 1994. More critically, Dr. Smock never examined Emily Noble's remains in person. He never visited the scene. His conclusions were based solely on reports and photographs. On September 16, 2021, exactly 1 year after the remains were found, a death certificate was issued. The manner of death: homicide by manual strangulation. Delaware County Coroner Dr. Mark Sleeper, a family practice physician rather than a licensed forensic pathologist, later explained the delay. OSU specialists had initially refused to endorse the homicide ruling. Sleeper eventually learned that, as the elected coroner, he could sign the certificate himself. Meanwhile, in March 2021, investigators returned to the area where the body had been found. They discovered bones that had been missed during the initial recovery, including Emily's arms. Bones investigators originally believed had been taken for DNA testing but were, in fact, still lying in the soil. The discovery exposed serious flaws in the initial scene processing. The case against Matthew Moore remained largely circumstantial, but prosecutors believed it was powerful. Phone records created a troubling timeline. Emily's phone stopped showing user activity at 6:00 p.m. On May 24, Moore's phone, however, showed continuous activity until 6:00 a.m. The next morning, analysis of Moore's phone revealed something critical. While he claimed he had been at a bus depot that morning, part of his job Checking advertisements on buses, the data told a different story. At 9:25 am, Moore's phone pinged off a tower at Murphy's Quarry. Less than a mile from the home, the quarry was visible from the property. CCTV footage captured what appeared to be Moore's blue Fiat driving past the quarry at 9:59 a.m. Heading away from the house, only after this did his phone appear in Broadstone, where he claimed to have been the entire morning. CCTV cameras filmed Emily passing the quarry 3 minutes later. She was seen returning home at 9:41 a.m. Investigators believed she was killed shortly after she arrived back at the condo. Police also learned that Moore had moved items in the garage while officers were present during the missing person investigation. He shifted an orange extension cord and a cooler, leaving a flashlight next to both objects. Prosecutors argued that he used the flashlight to illuminate the woods while staging Emily's body at night. Moore's behavior during his police interview raised additional concerns. He repeatedly referred to Emily in the past tense. He mentioned end her life multiple times, long before her body had been found on June 17, 2021. More than a year after Emily vanished, a Delaware County grand jury returned an indictment. Matthew Moore was arrested the same day during a traffic stop by heavily armed Westerville police officers. Reporters surrounded him as he stood in handcuffs. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, felony murder, and purposeful murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. Bond was set at $2.5 million. Moore remained in the Delaware County Jail until the trial concluded. The trial began on August 16, 2022. Prosecutors Mark Sleeper and Melissa Schiff faced off against defense attorney Diane Menashe. The jury visited the couple's home and the wooded area where Emily's body had been discovered. Opening statements were delivered on August 17. The prosecution framed its case around Emily's resilience. Lead prosecutor Sleeper recounted the tragedies Emily had endured, the friends she lost to AIDS, the deaths of her parents, her first husband's end his life. The prosecution's star witness was Dr. Bill Smock. He testified without hesitation. Emily Noble's hyoid fracture did not come from her hanging. It came from strangulation. She was strangled manually and then placed in the tree. During Dr. Amanda Agnew's presentation on the skeletal analysis, she was questioned about her findings. She admitted that the right nasal cavity was not fractured and that a graduate student contributed to the report. The defense attacked the integrity of the investigation itself. Crime scene evidence had been mishandled. Teeth and bones had been left behind, only to be recovered months later. The wooded area where Emily's body was ultimately found had never been searched. No DNA, no blood, no direct link tying Moore to the crime. During closing arguments, the prosecution revealed their full theory for the first time. They believed Moore had followed Emily during a walk on the evening of May 24, attacked her in the wooded area after his 30-minute phone call around 7:30 p.m., and then staged the scene during the 3-hour. Moore grew visibly emotional in the courtroom, throwing up his arms in frustration. When Menashe referenced Moore's son's end his life, Moore wiped away tears. At least one juror was seen crying. On August 26, 2022, after just under 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Not guilty on all 3 counts. Moore collapsed forward, burying his face in his hands as he sobbed. He cradled his head and repeatedly mouthed, "Thank you," toward the jury box. In March 2023, Moore published a book titled Emily, a staged suicide in Ohio. In it, he maintains that Emily died by ended her own life. He described the writing process as therapeutic and said he hoped Emily's family would one day read it. Despite her family's unwavering belief that Emily Noble was murdered, and despite her death certificate listing homicide by manual strangulation, no one has ever been convicted. The truth of what happened in those woods remains unresolved, suspended between two stark possibilities. What is certain is that Emily, a 52-year-old woman who spent her life overcoming tragedy, is gone. One ordinary afternoon on a deserted Queensland beach, a young woman walks her dog and never returns. The next morning, her father discovers her body partially buried in the sand, naked, with clear signs of a struggle to the death. No witnesses, no cameras, no cries for help, just a dog tied to a tree and a car still sitting quietly at the beach entrance. From there, Australia is drawn into a thrilling, years-long case, with the suspect fleeing to the other side of the world, ambiguous confessions, and a series of secrets from the victim's personal life gradually revealed who killed Toyah accordingly, and why. In today's video, we take a look at the entire story of the Toyah accordingly case. We will start from the last moment she was alive, then go through the investigation, the search for the killer, and finally, the unsolved mysteries after more than 6 years. This is a heartbreaking story about searching for the truth. Toyah accordingly, born in 1994, grew up in Cairns, a city in northeastern Australia, with her parents, Troy and Vanessa. From a young age, she showed great compassion for people and animals. Toyah attended local schools, completed a pharmaceutical program, and worked in a pharmacy. Despite her busy schedule, she always made time for animals. She volunteered at the Paws and Claws Animal Shelter, providing care, walking dogs, and cleaning. Her colleagues remember her dedication. She never missed a shift and often returned to check on sick animals. Toyah's love for animals extended beyond volunteering. She advocated for their protection, promoted spaying and neutering, condemned cruelty, and encouraged shelter adoptions. At the time, Toyah was in a relationship with Marco Heidenreich, with whom she lived. They spend weekends together, go on picnics, and share photos on social media. However, some of Toyah's friends revealed that she had expressed doubts about the relationship and was considering breaking up. On October 21, 2018, 24 years old, Toyah went to Wangeti Beach, a remote beach between Cairns and Port Douglas in Queensland, Australia. She was taking care of India, her boyfriend's dog. As the sun set, Toyah arrived at the beach, parked her dark-colored Mitsubishi Lancer, leashed India, and began walking along the sand. No one directly witnessed her walk, but her presence was confirmed by phone tracking data and evidence found at the scene. The next morning, Toyah's car was still parked at the beach entrance, indicating something was wrong. India was found tied to a tree near the parking area. India was unharmed, but the situation was concerning. Toyah's wallet was inside the car, but her phone was missing. When Toyah didn't return home or respond to calls or messages, her loved ones became worried. Her mother and friends spent the night trying to contact her without success. On the morning of the 22nd of October, they went to Wangeti Beach and realized Toyah hadn't simply wandered off. The abandoned car, the tied-up dog, and the lack of contact indicated a serious problem. Wangeti Beach is a remote, unlit area with few nearby homes. These conditions made nighttime search difficult. By the morning of the 22nd of October, dozens of people had gathered at the beach. Toyah's family, friends, and community members organized a search effort, combing through the beach, dunes, trails, and brush. A sense of urgency and dread filled the air. Everyone sensed this wasn't a simple case of someone getting lost. Toyah's father, Troy Cordingley, joined the search team early that morning. He separated from the group and walked towards the area where the sand met the scrubland. There, he noticed disturbed sand. Kneeling down, he brushed the sand away and uncovered the body of a young woman, his daughter, Toyah. Her body was lying on its side, partially buried, and she was not clothed. Her personal belongings were missing. There were visible signs of trauma, including bruising and abrasions, suggesting she had been overpowered. There was no object nearby that could explain what happened. It was clear someone had tried to conceal the crime. Law enforcement secured the area immediately and began initial forensic procedures. Investigators documented footprints in the sand, examined the surrounding area, and interviewed people who might have seen Toyah the previous day. A key observation was the absence of drag marks, suggesting the crime occurred close to where her body was found. The person responsible had either been waiting for her or encountered her by chance. A formal report of a violent crime was filed, and the collection of physical evidence began. Samples of sand, shoe prints, and biological material were collected from within a roughly 160-foot radius. Based on the scene, authorities suspected the motive might have involved intentional violence. However, they did not immediately confirm this to the public. The news of Toyah's death quickly spread throughout the community. Local media reported the tragic death of a young woman at a secluded beach, causing public alarm. Many women in the Cairns area became afraid to walk alone. Authorities publicly promised to do everything possible to identify the person responsible and bring them to justice. Police began reviewing surveillance footage from highway cameras, shopping centers, and public areas to trace Toyah's movements in the hours before her death. At the same time, DNA samples were being collected for comparison with the evidence found at the scene. Toyah's body was transported to Brisbane for a thorough forensic examination to determine the exact cause and time of death, and to look for any signs of targeted violence. From that point on, the case was handled by detectives, forensic analysts, and medical examiners. Surveillance footage showed that Toyah had stopped at Rusty's Market in Cairns to buy groceries before going to the beach. She was seen leaving with a bag and walking calmly to her car. Nothing about her behavior or the people around her seemed unusual. Additional footage from cameras along the Captain Cook Highway, which leads to Wangeti Beach, provided only a partial view. There were no surveillance cameras in the area around the beach, making the investigation more difficult. Authorities asked the public for any dashcam footage recorded on the 21st of October between 10 o'clock a.m. and 11 o'clock p.m., especially footage of vehicles near the beach turnoffs or along the coastal road. Investigators carefully reviewed all the received footage, comparing timestamps and vehicle types. Some videos helped track a few cars that entered and exited the beach area that day. One of these was a white SUV, but the driver was identified, interviewed, and ruled out as a suspect. However, several vehicles remained unidentified despite public appeals, and the repeated release of video stills through the media. In addition to reviewing surveillance footage, authorities were actively seeking potential witnesses, such as people who might have been fishing, walking, or relaxing on the beach that day. Officers questioned people who had visited nearby parking areas, gas stations, and convenience stores. Unfortunately, no one reported seeing Toyah at the beach that evening. This led investigators to believe that the crime likely occurred in a remote and less visited area of the coastline. Detectives searched for Toyah's missing clothing, athletic leggings, a t-shirt, flip-flops, and a rubber bracelet. Despite thorough searches, none of these items were found. Police asked residents to check their properties, ditches, wooded areas, and roadsides for anything unusual. Some tips were received, but none led to items connected to the case. a medical examination revealed evidence suggesting a violent assault. Law enforcement didn't immediately confirm this publicly, but leaked documents indicated a possible targeted attack before Toyah's death. Neck injuries, bruising, and the body's position supported this theory. DNA samples from the body and surrounding area were sent to a Brisbane lab. The results were important, but no matches were found in criminal databases. The lack of evidence and witnesses caused frustration in the media and online. People speculated and shared theories. Meanwhile, investigators continued working, hoping for a breakthrough. Police investigated every lead, tracking routes, verifying alibis, and examining social connections. Several weeks after Toyah's death, the investigation focused on Rajwinder Singh. He was an Australian citizen of Indian descent, living in Innisfail, 90 minutes from the crime scene, and working as a nurse. He was suspected due to several remarkable coincidences, including his behavior at the time of Toyah's disappearance. On 21 October 2018, when Toyah went missing, cell tower data showed he was near Wangeti Beach. This matched the time Toyah was believed to be there. Investigators were also concerned that Rajwinder stopped going to work without notice and abruptly left his home, wife, and sons. The following day, 22 October, he abruptly left Australia. He bought a one-way ticket to Delhi and boarded the flight without telling his employer or friends. He traveled light, and the booking was rushed. Since there were no formal charges against him, the border agents couldn't stop him. He left behind his wife's passport, belongings, and medical records without explanation. Once DNA results came back, authorities found a strong match with samples from Rajwinder. Footprints matching his were also found near the crime scene, giving investigators reason to issue charges. However, Rajwinder was already in India and couldn't be reached through official channels. He wasn't responding to communications and, according to Australian officials, no longer lived at his registered address. Investigators reviewed Rajwinder's medical history, which showed he'd sought treatment for hand injuries shortly after Toyah's disappearance. These included cuts and bruises, which experts believed could have come from a physical fight. Forensic findings confirmed that Toyah had fought back. Her body showed signs of a struggle, including defensive marks on her arms and face, likely from the attack. Rajwinder's actions after leaving Australia were suspicious. He didn't settle in one place or register with local authorities in India. Relatives reported he moved frequently and rarely stayed home. He sometimes pretended to be a pilgrim to stay in temples and used fake names. Living without identification helped him avoid police attention. His wife and sons stayed in Australia. He communicated with his family rarely and vaguely. His wife said she didn't know the details of the crime, but noticed he became withdrawn and tense before he disappeared. By the time Rajwinder was publicly named, Australian police had gathered a lot of evidence. They got an arrest warrant and asked Interpol for help. Rajwinder was put on an international wanted list. Australia asked India to extradite him, but Indian officials said they needed a completed pre-trial investigation and detailed evidence first. This began a long period of Rajwinder avoiding capture. Indian police occasionally received tips about his location, but they couldn't catch him. In Australia, the case was still a major public concern. Each mention of Rajwinder's name led to renewed public pressure on the government to speed up the extradition. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Toyah case focuses on two things: collecting and analyzing evidence in Australia and working with Indian authorities. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Australian officials increased pressure. The Queensland government provided more money to speed up the investigation. In November 2021, the police chief announced a reward of $1 million Australian dollars for information leading to Rajwinder's capture. He emphasized that solving Toyah's case was a high priority. The reward got attention in Indian media. As the story spread, New tips about Rajwinder's possible location came in. Some reports said he was seen in religious communities in Punjab, while others suggested he was hiding with relatives under a false name. Australian authorities shared this information with Indian police, leading to several searches. In November 2022, 4 years after the crime, Rajwinder was finally arrested in Delhi. He was found in the Janakpuri area, walking alone without identification. He didn't resist arrest. At first, he denied being Rajwinder Singh, but after being identified, he admitted he was the man who had fled Australia in October 2018. His arrest was officially confirmed. India's Ministry of Home Affairs announced that the extradition process had begun. Rajwinder was jailed in Delhi and given a lawyer. In his first court appearance, he said he didn't want to be extradited to Australia because he didn't trust the legal system and feared bias. This started a long legal process that lasted for months. Australia increased its diplomatic efforts. International law experts were brought in. Authorities formally documented all reasons for extradition, including expert reports and case materials. For the first time since Toyah's death, there was a real chance the suspect would face trial. But there were still many legal procedures, appeals, and questions about citizenship. During one interrogation, Rajwinder surprisingly admitted to being involved in the crime. The statement was recorded. However, a few days later, he changed his story, saying his confession was forced and untrue. He claimed he had nothing to do with Toyah's death. In a written statement, Rajwinder claimed the case was more complex than investigators suggested. He proposed a strange theory. There were 2 offenders and 2 victims at Wangeti Beach, implying he only witnessed someone else's actions. This theory lacked evidence, but intrigued his lawyers and complicated the legal proceedings. The Indian court agreed to hear Rajwinder's claim, further delaying the case. The legal process stalled repeatedly. Hearings were postponed, and the defense filed numerous objections, citing concerns about Rajwinder's rights. Despite this, in 2023, an Indian court approved the extradition request, determining that the documents from Australian authorities met international standards, allowing Rajwinder to be returned for trial. India's Minister of Home Affairs gave final approval. Preparations then began for Rajwinder's secure transfer. In November 2023, he was formally handed over to Australian law enforcement and brought to Queensland. State police officials met him and placed him in a secure detention facility. The flight and transfer were kept secret to prevent leaks or interference. Soon after arriving, formal charges were filed against Rajwinder, primarily for the intentional killing of Toyah. Accordingly, on October 21, 2018, the court ordered Rajwinder to remain in custody without bail. Prosecutors emphasized that Rajwinder had previously fled the country, evading justice for years, making him a flight risk. They also highlighted the seriousness of the violent crime and its cruelty. With Rajwinder back in Australia, trial preparations officially began. Authorities assured the public of a transparent legal process. Meanwhile, new details from the case files, previously confidential, emerged. One revelation involved Toyah's personal life. She had contact with another man named Tyson, a foodkara specialist. This detail was initially overlooked until investigators analyzed messages and phone data months after the incident. It revealed Toyah might have had a romantic relationship outside of her partnership with Marco. Toyah and Tyson began communicating casually a few weeks before the incident, exchanging online messages that soon became personal and emotionally open. Investigators found direct and vulnerable messages from Toyah in chat histories and archived social media. She shared her emotional struggles, doubts about her relationship with Marco, and her desire for change. In one message, she expressed her frustration and mentioned Marco's tantrums, saying he was losing control again. that she didn't feel safe, and that maybe it was time to end it. Another message expressed her wish for a break from the pressure. While no message directly accused Marco of wrongdoing, they showed emotional strain and Toyah's growing distance from him. She also told Tyson she was hiding their conversations. Initially, investigators lacked this information because Toyah's phone had missing chat records, and her messaging app didn't automatically back up deleted content. Advanced digital forensics recovered some erased data, revealing that Toyah had kept parts of her life private from Marco and that her behavior may have appeared distant or suspicious to him. This was a key breakthrough. With this new evidence, investigators re-examined Marco, who had previously been considered only a witness. The hidden messages and relationship tension prompted a re-evaluation of his alibi and movements on the day Toyah disappeared. The timeline shows Marco was in Cairns when Toyah disappeared. Work records and surveillance footage partially confirmed this. However, new messages prompted police to re-examine these records, focusing on the period between 2:00 p.m. and 9:00 p.m., when Toyah was likely at the beach. During those hours, Marco's phone activity decreased sharply. He became unresponsive to messages and later sent an unusual text. Additionally, a report surfaced that his car was seen near the Captain Cook Highway exit that evening, contradicting his statement that he stayed within central Cairns. These inconsistencies led to a second round of questioning. Marco confirmed being in Cairns, but struggled to explain the gaps in his movements. He denied involvement in Toyah's disappearance and claimed ignorance of her relationship with another man. Although there wasn't enough evidence to charge him, his answers raised concerns and warranted further investigation. Investigators then cross-referenced movement data for everyone mentioned in Toyah's communications, including phone records, travel patterns, surveillance footage, and witness statements. Tyson's location was verified in another city, making it impossible for him to be near the scene. He was ruled out as a suspect. This information led investigators to believe Toyah was experiencing significant internal conflict before her disappearance. These findings were added to the case file, despite the main suspect, Rajwinder Singh, being in custody. Investigators didn't rule out the possibility of other individuals being involved. Questions about motives, emotional dynamics, and hidden details remained. 6 years after Toyah's death, the case went to trial on the 22nd of July, 2024, at the Cairns District Court, attracting significant public attention. Despite substantial evidence, no verdict has been reached. The prosecution argues that Rajwinder acted alone, committed the crime with extreme cruelty, and fled the country to avoid justice. They suggested the motive involved inappropriate intent that escalated, but direct evidence of this is limited and remains unresolved. The defense argues that the case is based on circumstantial evidence. Rajwinder's attorneys maintain his innocence, claiming his prior confession in India was coerced and made without legal representation. They highlighted the lack of eyewitnesses and questioned the interpretation of DNA evidence, arguing it doesn't conclusively prove his involvement. A cryptic statement Rajwinder made during his extradition added complexity, but he later refused to elaborate, and his legal team unsuccessfully tried to have it excluded. Witnesses include police officers, forensic experts, medical professionals, Toyah's former co-workers, and people who interacted with Rajwinder in India. However, key question persists. Could someone else have been involved? How significant were the tensions between Toyah and Marco? Why hasn't an eyewitness come forward? These questions fuel public debate, but aren't formally part of the current charges. The hearings continue, and the judge is reviewing all evidence. Questioning is ongoing, and forensic experts are still submitting findings. Toyah's parents are present at the proceedings but haven't made public statements. Their quiet presence emphasizes the personal impact of the trial. The court's eventual verdict will conclude a long and painful process. For now, the case remains open, marked by unanswered questions, arguments, and the hope that the truth will emerge through the justice system. On a day in early 2021, San Diego police received an unusual call from a woman reporting that her stepfather was missing. At first, everyone thought it was an old man who got lost. But just a few days later, what they found in the backyard of that house revealed a controversial story: a wrapped and carefully hidden corpse. The adopted daughter, Jade, quickly became a murder suspect. And it all started with a gruesome secret buried in a computer, what pushed both fates to a dead end. Let's explore the whole story to get the answer. After the call, a patrol was sent to her home. Jade greeted the officers outside the home, acting polite and reserved. Inside, the house appeared spotless and orderly. But beneath this surface of normalcy lay a reality far darker than anyone could have expected. In truth, this story had begun long before the disappearance, and its ending would prove to be far more horrific than imagined. Jade Janks, a California native, was raised primarily by her father, her sole guardian since childhood. He provided stability, care, and unwavering support. Her relationship with her mother was far more complicated. Due to addiction and mental health struggles, her mother was often unable to give Jade the consistent care she needed. Still, Jade made efforts to maintain contact, visiting her mother when possible. When Jade was 14, her mother, Jenny, met Tom Merriman, who will become her stepfather. Tom was older, employed, and outwardly responsible. When Jade's half-brother, Cash, was born, she felt a deep affection for him and wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. At first, Tom was simply her mother's new partner, not playing much of a fatherly role. Their interactions were polite but distant. Over time, though, mutual respect and shared experiences forged a bond between them. Tom even began referring to Jade as his daughter. When Jenny relapsed and missed Cash's first school assembly, Jade realized she needed to step up. She made the difficult but brave choice to move in with Tom and Cash. Taking on the role her mother could no longer fulfill, Jade became the caretaker of the household, cleaning, managing daily routines, and raising her younger brother. This shared responsibility through difficult times brought Jade and Tom closer together. They worked side by side to navigate the chaos her mother's instability created. For Jade, Tom became more than just a stepfather. He was a stable, trusted father figure. After Jenny was taken into custody, Jade stayed with Tom and Cash. They moved into a new home, hoping for a fresh start. By then, Jade was in her early 20s. She continued managing the household and taking full responsibility for her brother. In many ways, Jade had lived between two worlds, one with the consistent love and stability of her father, and another where she was forced to take on adult responsibilities long before her time. Tom was her anchor in the latter world. Their bond became one of deep trust and dependence. That bond, however, would later make the events that unfolded even more disturbing. Tom Merriman, a 64-year-old resident of Solana Beach in San Diego County, was known as a man of strong character and discipline. He had 3 biological sons, but often spoke of having 4 children, always including Jade as his daughter, despite their lack of blood relation. For years, Tom worked in palm tree cultivation, but in 2011, he shifted his career, partnering with a colleague to launch a butterfly farm. The farm specialized in plants designed to attract butterflies, and it became especially successful when people spent more time at home and turned to gardening. Tom was admired for his passion, professionalism, and meticulous care of every plant on his farm. Customers praised him, colleagues respected him, and he was seen as a man who truly loved what he did. But behind this professional success, his personal life told a very different story. Tom was grappling with serious health complications. Years of alcohol misuse had left a devastating impact on his liver and heart. Outwardly, he maintained the appearance of being functional and productive, but behind the scenes, he was under constant medical supervision and dependent on powerful medications. By late 2020, things became even more difficult. After undergoing eye surgery that temporarily impaired his vision, Tom suffered a fall that left him with injuries, requiring an extended stay in a rehabilitation facility. During that time, Jade Janks took on full responsibility for looking after the family, visiting regularly to keep things in order and prepare for Tom's return. Fully aware that he would not be able to manage on his own, when Jade moved into her mother's household years earlier, she quickly became an active part of the family's daily life. Living with Tom had settled into a routine. He provided financial support and was present from time to time, while Jade handled nearly everything inside the home. But beneath this surface of stability, tensions had begun to quietly build. Over time, Jade realized she was carrying far more than her fair share. She was managing almost all the responsibilities of the household, while Tom seemed increasingly detached. Even though he was the father of her younger brother, it was Jade who handled every detail of his upbringing. The weight of this imbalance left her feeling overwhelmed and resentful. What made matters worse were Tom's frequent, disparaging remarks about her biological father, a man Jade deeply respected and loved. Her father had raised her with stability and consistency, becoming her rock through life's challenges. Tom, however, often belittled her father, making unnecessary comparisons in an effort to paint himself as superior to Jade. It felt like a direct attempt to erase and replace her father's presence in her life. His words weren't just insulting, they were deeply disrespectful. The unease grew steadily. Jade struggled with the boundaries of her role. She didn't want to abandon her brother, who still relied on her, especially in their mother's absence. Yet, living in an environment where her efforts were ignored and her emotions dismissed became increasingly unbearable. Her contributions had turned into something taken for granted, with no acknowledgement, no gratitude. Eventually, Jade made the decision to move out. It wasn't impulsive, but the result of years of built-up frustration and a longing to reclaim her independence. She shifted her focus to her career, carving out a life that was fully her own. Though she stayed in touch with Tom and her brother, her interactions with Tom remained formal and distant. Her bond with her brother remained strong, but she kept Tom at arm's length. For a while, it seemed like their shared story had quietly come to an end. But then, by sheer coincidence, life pulled them back together. Jade purchased a house on the very same street as Tom, just a few doors away. What began as casual encounters on the sidewalk slowly turned into short conversations, and eventually, occasional dinner invitations. Little by little, their connection began to rebuild. To outsiders, their relationship appeared close and harmonious. Tom seemed genuinely grateful for her presence, especially as his health declined further. Jade didn't show visible signs of anger or resentment, and from the outside, it looked like they had managed to repair their bond. But beneath that surface, Jade's true feelings remained far more complicated. Though she resumed a familiar rhythm of communication with Tom, the warmth was gone. Her presence in his life seemed driven more by obligation than affection. She was polite, attentive, and considerate, but kept her emotions guarded. She was once again inside his home, but no longer felt like she belonged there. What others saw as harmony was little more than a fragile illusion, an uneasy truce hiding under the surface. It was under these conditions that the story took a drastic turn. In late December 2020, while Tom was recovering in a medical facility, Jade was tidying up his house. As she wiped down a table, she accidentally brushed against the computer. It had been in sleep mode, and the screen suddenly lit up. What appeared stunned her. It was a private, intimate photo of herself, fully exposed, one she had once sent years earlier to a former partner in confidence. At first, Jade tried to find a logical explanation, maybe a glitch, maybe a mistake, but it quickly became clear that this was no accident. The image had been deliberately set as the desktop background, filling the entire screen. It was intentional, not some random technical error. She froze, unsure how to respond. In the home of someone she had once trusted, she had just encountered a shocking invasion of her privacy. That moment became a turning point, one that permanently changed her perception of Tom. What she saw wasn't just deeply unsettling, it hinted at something potentially criminal. She had no way of knowing where the images had come from, or, more disturbingly, whether any of them had been taken when she was underage. Though more troubling discoveries still lay ahead, in that instant, Jade understood her life had just shifted irreversibly. Instead of leaving the house, Jade remained, shaken, but driven by the need to understand. She powered up the computer fully and began combing through its files. Outwardly calm, she was inwardly consumed by dread. Opening the file manager, she noticed several hidden folders, each locked with a password. To her shock, one opened. The password was the name of one of her pets. Inside were hundreds of photos, images of herself sorted by year. These were not casual snapshots. They were invasive, captured without her knowledge, in the bathroom, in the bedroom, during moments when she was changing clothes or simply relaxing at home. It was more than disturbing. It shattered her sense of safety. Each new discovery deepened her horror. Some appeared to have been taken with hidden cameras, perhaps surveillance devices installed in the house. At first glance, someone else might have assumed they were random internet images, but Jade knew better. She recognized herself instantly: the pajamas, the room decor, the subtle expressions, the everyday body language no one else should have seen. Her mind struggled to process the sheer volume. The initial shock gave way to horror, then to a deep physical revulsion. Her breathing grew ragged. A wave of nausea hit her, and it felt as though everything around her was collapsing. Each new folder, each new image only intensified the crushing realization that her life had been built on hidden surveillance and deception. Jade didn't call emergency services. In that moment, her actions weren't guided by logic or planning, but by raw emotion. She began deleting the files. One by one, she opened every folder and subfolder, scanning for duplicates or backups. Yet with each image erased came the painful understanding that this was something she could never delete from memory. Desperately, she searched for a way to destroy everything completely and permanently. Then she found an external hard drive. The realization hit instantly. This was likely where the bulk of the archive was stored. After plugging it in, she discovered the same folder structure, except this time the number of files was even greater. Jade deleted every image, then physically removed the hard drive. She struck it repeatedly with a heavy object until the casing cracked open. Wrapping it in a towel, she carried it outside and tossed it into a garbage bin. Only after making sure the data could never be recovered did she return inside and sink to the floor. Exhausted and unsure what to do next, what she had once thought of as her family now seemed like something else entirely. This wasn't just betrayal, it was the unraveling of everything she believed in. The collapse of the very values her life had been built upon. After destroying the hard drive, Jade found herself spiraling into a state she could no longer control. Sleep became impossible. Each time she closed her eyes, the images returned. In her mind, she saw her own body, familiar yet violated. Again and again, the same thoughts played on a relentless loop. He saw this. He saved this. He looked at it for years. She began to feel an unbearable sense of shame, as though something inside her was ruined, used, no longer her own. Even standing under the shower felt wrong. The water didn't cleanse her. It made her feel more exposed. She scrubbed her skin until it turned red, yet the discomfort remained. Every glance in the mirror carried the eerie sensation of being watched, not as a person, but as an object. That feeling sank deep into her sense of self and refused to let go. Jade lost her appetite completely. Just the thought of food made her stomach twist. Her mind was consumed by relentless, growing anxiety. Every sound outside the door, every footstep in the hall, felt like a threat. She strained to hear noises in the silence, checked the locks repeatedly, left the lights on. The fear never lifted, not even in daylight. One thought dominated everything. If Tom discovered she had found the photos and destroyed them, he would never forgive her. She was certain he was capable of anything, that he could take drastic action. She remembered his past behavior, the control, the harshness disguised as care, and realized how she had once mistaken it for protection. Evenings became the worst. To calm her panic, Jade spread a sheet of plastic she had found in Tom's garage across her bed. It made no rational sense, but it was a desperate attempt to feel clean, to feel safe. Sleep was impossible unless she stayed fully dressed. The lights on, a knife gripped in her hand through the night. Reality and fear blurred together. The paranoia only deepened. The possibility that Tom might discover what she had done became her greatest fear. Her life narrowed into a constant state of bracing for impact. Her body and mind locked in fight or flight. Doubt, panic, revulsion, and terror fused into something unbearable. Rational thought began to fray, and in that fragile state, Jade started planning her next move. Overwhelmed, she reached out to a man she barely knew, someone she had met once at a party. They were not friends, only a vague memory attached to a phone number. She sent a brief message asking for help, offering no explanation. He read it, but never replied. An hour passed, then a day, and still nothing. His silence only deepened her isolation. No one knew what she was going through. The one person she reached for had either been frightened away or simply didn't want to get involved. Once again, Jade was left alone with her thoughts. One afternoon, she walked into a hardware store. In her basket were items she never imagined buying. Medications that could sedate, a rope, a shower curtain, gloves. Her heart pounded as the cashier glanced at her purchase but said nothing. She paid quickly and left. That night, Jade sat in her car, gripped by indecision. Should she leave? Just drive and never look back? But where could she go? She had no plan. No one to turn to. Only the fear that if she ran, Tom would remain, with backup copies of the images, still able to cause more harm. Inside her, a battle raged. A desperate urge to end it all against the terror of crossing that line. Committing such an act felt unbearable. Yet so did the thought of living with what she had seen. Her life had become a closed loop, with no way out. On the morning of December 31, Jade picked Tom up from the rehabilitation center. Despite his frailty and a recent incident of self-harm, doctors had approved his release with a signed waiver. Jade helped him collect his belongings and drove him home. Along the way, and once inside the house, she supported him carefully. He was far too weak to manage on his own. Back at the house, she prepared a comfortable space for him in a first-floor bedroom. She set out water, medication, and pillows. Everything seemed in order, but Jade already had a plan in motion. Along with his discharge, Tom had been prescribed Zolpidem, a powerful sleep aid. Knowing its effects, especially in larger doses, Jade handed him several pills under the guise of helping him rest. Tom took them without question. She watched as the sedative took hold, his speech slurred, his movements slowed, and within less than an hour, he was unable to get out of bed. His eyes grew vacant, his breathing heavy. He was alive, but completely incapacitated. Jade sat by his side, calmly watching, without fear or visible emotion, fully aware of how helpless he had become. There was no turning back. Inside her, everything was still. Time, thought, doubt. The house was silent. No shouting, no confrontation, just him lying motionless in bed, and her quietly watching, holding the power to decide what came next. As Tom grew nearly unresponsive, too heavy for her to move alone, Jade realized she needed help getting him inside from the porch. She began sending messages. The first went to a man she had once been casually involved with, Adam Sipliak. She kept it simple. "Can you help me get my stepfather inside? He's not feeling well." Adam came quickly, but when he saw Tom barely responsive, he froze. He sensed immediately that something was wrong. Jade insisted, "Just help me carry him inside." That's all. Adam touched Tom, felt how unresponsive he was, then stepped back and left without a word. He never replied to her messages again. Jade then contacted another acquaintance, someone younger and more naive. She told him she needed help with some household tasks, but when he arrived and saw a nearly motionless man on the floor, paired with Jade's detached behavior, unease took over. He refused to get involved, saying the situation felt off, and left. Both men sensed danger, but neither called emergency services. They simply walked away, leaving Jade alone with Tom, who was still alive, though shallowly breathing, consciousness fading, body failing. Jade remained alone with him. She didn't act immediately. Hours passed after she managed to pull him back inside. He lay on the floor while she paced in circles, unable to make a final decision, yet far past the point of return. Late at night, she placed a plastic bag over his head. He didn't resist. Jade stood nearby, silently watching as his breathing slowed. Then, without a word, she tightened a rope around his neck. Everything happened in silence. Tom no longer moved. The next morning, she moved his body to her car. She wrapped it in fabric, tied it securely, and pushed it onto the back seat. The vehicle sat for hours, with the windows rolled up under the direct sun. Jade stayed inside the house, paralyzed with uncertainty. Her phone remained silent. No one was looking for Tom. Everything around her was eerily quiet. By evening, she dragged the body into the backyard. Among old boxes and discarded items, she carefully tucked it into a corner, concealed between crates, and covered it with debris. She arranged everything so it blended in, nothing that would draw attention. Then she went back inside and locked the door. A full day passed. Jade didn't leave the house. She ignored phone calls and messages, pretending nothing had happened. No one asked questions. Several more days went by. Tom hadn't contacted anyone, nor had he returned to the rehabilitation center. At first, staff weren't alarmed. Delays were not unusual, but by the third day, concern began to grow. On the fifth day, Jade finally called emergency services. Speaking calmly, she explained that she had been looking after a family friend, Tom. He had spent a few hours at her home after being discharged, then left and never came back. She said she was worried and had no idea where he might be. That call officially set the missing person investigation in motion. Officers arrived the same day. Jade greeted them at the door, polite but visibly tense. She repeated her story. A quick scan of the property and a cursory look inside revealed no obvious red flags, and there was no legal basis for a deeper search. Jade provided a description of what Tom had been wearing and gave his contact information. The next day, staff from the rehabilitation facility informed police that Tom had failed to collect essential documents and medication, and that his phone had been off for several days. This heightened their suspicions. Investigators visited Jade again, and this time the interaction felt different. Her earlier composure had begun to crack. She contradicted herself during questioning. When asked about recent communication with Tom, she admitted deleting their messages. That statement immediately raised concern for investigators. By the following morning, January 2, 2021, police had obtained a search warrant. With legal clearance, they began a detailed examination of Jade's house and yard. The initial sweep revealed very little. No signs of violence, no struggle, no traces of blood. Jade, looking exhausted, answered calmly but briefly, repeating that she had no idea where Tom had gone. The backyard, cluttered with boxes and construction debris, did not draw immediate attention. Investigators noted the mess but moved past it. Further searches that day turned up nothing. The next step was reviewing footage from neighboring security cameras. On one recording, investigators spotted a car pulling up to Jade's house the night Tom vanished. Later, someone was seen carrying an object wrapped in fabric out of the garage. The video quality was poor, but it was enough to raise serious suspicion. Police returned with a key -9 unit. The dogs became alert near the backyard, prompting investigators to re-examine a pile of boxes and tarps stacked in a corner near the alley. Beneath the tarp, they noticed the edge of a carpet. Under it was a body wrapped in cloth. The discovery marked a turning point in the case. Jade was inside the house when officers asked her to step out. At first, she acted confused, as if she didn't understand. When told a body had been found, her reaction was unusually calm. No panits, no tears, just tense silence. The deceased was quickly identified as Tom. Though the body had already begun decomposing, clothing and physical features matched. The investigators had not only digital evidence but also physical proof. Jade's home was sealed off. Her electronic devices were seized, and her message history recovered. Her status shifted from witness to suspect. Taken into custody, she underwent interrogation with an attorney present. She declined to give a statement, maintaining she had no idea how Tom had died and insisting their relationship had been positive until the end. While forensic teams worked, investigators turned to Jade's phone. Analysis uncovered messages where she asked acquaintances to help move Tom. 2 recipients confirmed receiving the texts and testified on Jade's Notes app. Authorities found a disturbing shopping list: gloves, bleach, plastic sheeting, rope. Receipts and surveillance footage confirmed she had purchased these items just days before Tom's death. On her laptop, searches were uncovered for zolpidem effects, toxic doses, and methods of suffocation without leaving signs. Forensic technicians detected Tom's DNA and fibers from his clothing on the carpet where the body had been hidden. On the plastic wrap, Jade's fingerprints were identified. Phone data confirmed she had picked Tom up from the hospital on the day of his death. During that drive, she sent a chilling message. "I've got him. Everything's going according to plan." A visual inspection of the body revealed no obvious trauma, but the autopsy told another story. The medical examiner identified clear signs of suffocation and zolpidem levels far beyond the therapeutic range. The official conclusion: Tom's death was caused by a combination of chemical sedation and asphyxiation. At that point, investigators had no doubt that Tom's death was not accidental. The case now centered on a premeditated act, carefully planned and executed. At the conclusion of the investigation, the district attorney formally charged Jade Janks with first-degree murder. The case was extensive, supported by digital evidence, eyewitness testimony, and expert reports. The trial drew widespread public attention. Journalists filled the courtroom, and interrogation transcripts were widely circulated. Jade's character and motives became the subject of heated public debate. The prosecution built its case on a variety of evidence, including text messages, purchase history, and her actions before and after Tom's death. Prosecutors argued that Jade had deliberately orchestrated the killing and then tried to cover her tracks. The defense, in contrast, portrayed Jade as a victim. They argued that years of exploitation and betrayal at the hands of Tom had pushed her into emotional collapse and left her feeling hopeless. Janks's attorneys proposed a plea deal, partial admission of guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence and the avoidance of life without parole. But the prosecution rejected the offer, pressing for the maximum penalty. When Jade took the stand for her final statement, she expressed no guilt for Tom's death. Instead, she said her only regret was not walking away from the situation sooner. After a week-long trial and several days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge, relying on forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the investigation's findings, sentenced Jade Janks to 25 years to life in prison for Tom Merriman's murder. In his closing remarks, he acknowledged her personal trauma and emotional stress, but emphasized that she had no legal right to take justice into her own hands. Justice, he said, must be carried out within the framework of the law. Following the verdict, the prosecutor stated that justice had been served. He acknowledged the moral complexity of the case, but underscored that, from a legal standpoint, her actions could not be justified. Jade's defense attorneys announced their intention to appeal, arguing that the court had not fully considered the long-term psychological harm she had suffered. The verdict sparked public debate. Some supported the court's decision, stressing the need for legal accountability, while others expressed sympathy for Jade, believing she had been cornered by a system that had failed to protect her. One of the detectives later reflected, "It was one of the most difficult cases of his career. What happened there is too complicated for black and white judgments." But the fact that a life had been taken could not be ignored. Several months later, Jade's appeal was denied. The sentence was upheld. Finally, the Jade Janks case was closed, leaving behind a heavy sentence and endless controversies. This is a warning: when falling into the tragedy of abuse or mental trauma, people need to seek help from the law and the community, instead of letting the obsession push them into the path of crime, because a wrong decision can destroy both fates and leave a wound that will never fade. In Luton, Bedfordshire, United Kingdom, on the evening of Monday, May 23, 2016, a 34-year-old woman was brutally murdered inside her family home on Overstone Road. Saima Khan, a devoted mother of 4 young children, became the victim of a crime so savage that it shocked the entire community. She had been stabbed 68 times. The wounds were so vicious that her head and arm were nearly severed. From the outside, the Khan residence looked like an ordinary, modern family home, blending in with the other houses in the quiet, suburban street. But inside, officers encountered a scene of horrific carnage. Blood was everywhere, as if gallons had been splattered across the walls, stairs, and floor. This story centers on the Khan family, originally from Pakistan. Saima, the elder, was born in 1982, while her younger sister, Sabah, was born 7 years later, in 1989. The family also included 2 brothers. They spent their early years in the Netherlands, but when Saima turned 18, the entire family relocated to England in search of better opportunities. The Khan household was traditional, yet modern. They maintained strong Islamic values and pride in their heritage, while also adapting to Western life. Both sisters grew up fluent in Dutch and later mastered English after the move. They shared a deep bond. Saima, known for her kindness and gentle nature, often looked after Sabah like a second mother. Sabah adored her older sister, once saying they were one soul divided between 2 bodies. When the family settled in Luton's Overstone Road, they joined a large Pakistani community. Luton, about 30 miles north of London, has one of the largest Muslim populations in the UK, with nearly a third of residents identifying as Muslim. Here, Saima pursued her dream of helping others by studying nursing. She had a natural gift for caregiving and wanted to dedicate her life to supporting those in need. After completing her training, she began working as a home care nurse. Patients described her as reliable, warm, and compassionate, a woman who radiated calm. The Khan family lived in a 2-story brick townhouse, typical of many European neighborhoods. Each apartment in this townhouse had a separate street-level entry. Such homes are commonly found in most European cities. By the time Saima turned 21, her parents began searching for a suitable husband for her. In keeping with tradition, they reached out to extended relatives in Pakistan. Arranged marriages are common among Pakistani families in the UK, sometimes even used as a means to secure British residency or citizenship. Many of these unions end unhappily, with young women, accustomed to Western freedoms, finding themselves in restrictive or even abusive marriages. But Saima's case was different. No one pressured her. She trusted her parents' judgment and agreed willingly. Family meant everything to her. She wanted to marry and start her own. Her future husband was Hafiz Rahman, a man 3 years older than her and 10 years older than Sabah. Hafiz had lived his entire life in Pakistan and was considered by relatives to be a respectable match for Saima. Hafiz's family hoped that moving to Britain would give him more opportunities and a better life. By marrying a British resident, Hafiz would be able to secure a British passport and become a full-fledged citizen of the United Kingdom. After the wedding in Pakistan, Hafiz and Saima returned together to the United Kingdom. The newlyweds moved into the Khan family home, following the cultural custom in many Muslim households of living as one large, close-knit family. Hafiz eventually gained citizenship and found work as a taxi driver. He held firmly to traditional values, expecting his wife to bear children, raise them, care for her husband, prepare meals, and manage the household. Saima, however, never intended to give up her career entirely. She balanced her duties as a wife with her work caring for patients. Not long after their marriage, she became pregnant with their first child, a daughter. Before she could fully recover from that pregnancy, more followed in quick succession. In the end, they had 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. 3 generations of the family lived together under one roof, supporting and caring for each other. In total, 11 people shared the townhouse. Hafiz, Saima, and their 4 children, Saima's parents, her 2 brothers, and her younger sister, Sabah. On the surface, life seemed to be going well, apart from the ordinary domestic disagreements that occur in any household, especially one so large. At some point, However, Saima began to feel growing tension with her sister. The shift started after Saima's marriage to Hafiz. Once she became a wife and mother, Saima's priorities naturally changed. To Saima, it felt like her sister no longer made time for her, focusing instead on her husband and children. Over time, Saima grew weary of living in her older sister's shadow. Within this crowded household, a secret began to take shape. Known only to two people, Saima had fallen in love with her sister's husband, Hafiz. Shockingly, he reciprocated, despite the 10-year age gap, despite the taboo of Saima being his wife's younger sister, and despite the fact that they all lived together under one roof. The two embarked on a passionate affair. Their attraction quickly consumed them both. It started innocently enough, fleeting glances, playful teasing, the rush of a forbidden thrill. Hafiz, more experienced, recognized what lay behind the young girl's looks. In truth, he exploited her immaturity and naivety. The affair began shortly after the birth of Saima's first child. Exhausted and fully absorbed in caring for her newborn daughter, Saima didn't notice the way her younger sister was looking at her husband. At the time, the sisters still had a fairly warm relationship. Saima even helped look after the baby, playing the role of a loving aunt, while secretly melting into the arms of her sister's husband. Whenever no one was watching, the secret relationship carried on for years. It would occasionally end, only to resume with even greater intensity as time passed. Saima became increasingly obsessed with Hafiz. They relied on WhatsApp to communicate, the only way to conceal their affair within a household filled with family members. With each passing wave of passion, the relationship grew more volatile as jealousy of her sister deepened. She was consumed with rage whenever she saw Hafiz giving Saima attention. She complained bitterly that he could message her day and night, yet could never find enough time to be alone with her. The affair was dangerously complicated. The tight-knit family, all living under one roof, turned the house into a pressure cooker, a volcano on the verge of erupting. And though the affair unfolded right under their noses, no one seemed to notice. Or perhaps they simply chose to look away, pretending nothing was wrong. Most likely, the relatives simply thought any possibility of an affair between Saima and Hafiz was unthinkable. Their upbringing and faith didn't even allow them to imagine such a thing. Saima herself paid no attention to the strange glances between her husband and younger sister. She was a devoted mother of 4, juggling childcare with part-time caregiving work, exhausted and overburdened. She had neither the time nor the energy to keep watch over her husband, and she certainly never suspected such a betrayal from her own sister, whom she had loved, cared for since childhood. Meanwhile, Hafiz and Saima would steal moments together whenever Saima was away. Sometimes they used the taxi Hafiz drove for work. Other times, they met in the family's marital bedroom. At that point, the children were 7, 4, 2, and 1 years old. Since Saima often stayed home to help care for them, her presence in the bedroom didn't raise suspicion. Hafiz, with the flexibility of his taxi shifts, deliberately arranged his time off to coincide with his wife's working hours. Though their affair carried on for years, Hafiz still put his wife first. This infuriated Saima. At one point, Hafiz even considered marrying Saima as a second wife. But when he consulted a local imam, he was told it was forbidden in Islam to marry 2 sisters at the same time. So Hafiz abandoned the idea and continued meeting Saima in secret. For him, she became the ultimate forbidden fruit, young, naive, and forbidden by custom from having any relationship before marriage to Hafiz. This only made the affair more intoxicating. A few months into the relationship, Saima became pregnant. Hafiz, who refused to use contraception, insisted she terminate the pregnancy to avoid scandal and keep their affair hidden. Saba went through with the abortion, but the experience left scars. It may also have been the moment Hafiz realized that continuing an affair with his wife's younger sister was unsustainable. By February 2016, after 4 years of secret meetings, Hafiz decided to end the affair and recommit to his wife and children. He began considering moving his family into their own home, away from the crowded household, but the very thought of losing him drove Saba into despair. She couldn't bear the idea that Hafiz had chosen his wife and children over her. That desperation soon twisted into something darker. Saba began obsessively searching online for ways to remove her sister from the picture. In her mind, Saima was the only obstacle between herself and Hafiz. Without Saima, Saba imagined she could step into her place, becoming his wife and raising the children as her own. Her internet searches grew more alarming. She looked up where to buy venomous snakes, studied différents poisons, researched how to hire hitmen, and even pored over an article titled 16 Steps to End Someone's Life and Not Get Caught. In March 2016, Saba reached out to a self-proclaimed sorcerer in Pakistan who claimed he could kill through black magic. Saba paid the so-called sorcerer more than $6,000 to place a deadly curse on Saima. When nothing happened, Saba grew furious. She contacts the self-proclaimed wizard again, complaining that her life is getting worse. Hafiz no longer cares about her and seems completely indifferent. She begged him to hurry and finish off her sister so that Hafiz would finally be hers. But after she sent the money for this final ritual, the sorcerer disappeared. He had been nothing more than an online scammer. Saba couldn't bear the thought of losing Hafiz forever. To her, he was her soulmate, the man for whom she had broken Islamic rules, endured an abortion, and done things most women would never dare. Worse still, her parents had started pressing the issue of marriage for her. Talks had been ongoing for months, with a potential suitor already identified, but negotiations stalled because the families couldn't agree on the terms. Even so, the pressure was immense. As much as she loved Hafiz, openly defying her parents was nearly impossible. She felt trapped, beaten down by blow after blow. To make matters worse, she had to watch her sister Saima live the life everyone envied. A devoted husband, 4 beautiful children, and what looked like the perfect marriage. By contrast, Saba was unmarried, childless, and directionless. Resentment festered, and soon her envy turned into rage. She began to blame Saima for everything that had gone wrong in her life. Those emotions drowned out any last trace of reason. For Saba, it felt like her sister was stealing the very life she deserved. To her twisted mind, the only solution was to remove Saima from the picture once and for all. Meanwhile, Saima and Hafiz had found a new apartment across Luton, where they planned to move with their children. The moving date was already set, May 25th, 2016. By then, Hafiz had grown colder towards Saba, pouring more energy into repairing his marriage. In a desperate bid to win him back, Saba sent him anguished love messages. She wrote that no force on earth could change her feelings, that her heart was bleeding for him, and that she would do anything to prove her devotion. But behind these messages lurked a darker determination. If Hafiz wouldn't come back to her willingly, she would carve her own path to a happy ending. Saba decided to take matters into her own hands. On May 21st, 2016, she went to a supermarket and bought a large knife. She knew that on the evening of May 23rd, her parents, brothers, and Hafiz would all be away at a funeral at the local mosque, mourning a recently deceased relative. Saima couldn't attend because she had caregiving duties that night. Saba was left in charge of the children, a perfect setup for the plan she had been plotting. That night, once the children were asleep upstairs, the house was hers. She waited, knife ready, needing only to lure her sister home early. At 10:15 p.m., Saima left for work. Around 11, Saba sent her a text, pretending the youngest child was inconsolable and crying for her mother. 3 minutes later, Saima replied that she was on her way back. In reality, all 4 children were sound asleep. At 11:07 p.m., a neighbor's security camera caught Saima pulling into the driveway, stepping out of her car and walking toward the front door. Seconds later, the hallway light inside flicked on. 45 seconds after that, it went dark again. Within those few minutes, Saima Khan was ambushed in her own home. The moment Saima stepped through the front door and into the ground floor hallway, she had no idea that death was waiting just a few feet away. In an instant, her younger sister Saba lunged at her with the knife she had deliberately purchased the day before at the supermarket. Saima, caught completely off guard, lost those precious seconds that might have saved her life. She never expected her own sister to be the source of such danger, and the shock robbed her of the ability to defend herself. As the first blows landed, she struggled in vain, but the frenzied assault quickly overwhelmed her. Investigators would later confirm that Saima likely died within the first few minutes of the attack, screams that were quickly drowned out by the relentless violence of her assailant. Saba's rage knew no limits. She stabbed and slashed with such ferocity that by the end, Saima's body bore 68 separate wounds. The injuries were so savage that Saima's throat was cut almost completely through, leaving her close to decapitation. Even after her sister collapsed, Saba continued the onslaught, tearing off parts of her clothing and striking with such brutal force that one of Saima's arms was left hanging by little more than tissue and sinew. Upstairs, the eldest daughter was jolted awake. Frightened, she came to the top of the stairs and called out, asking her aunt what was happening. Saba, in the middle of her gruesome act, snapped at the child, coldly ordering her back to bed and dismissing the horrific sounds as nothing more than her trying to catch a mouse. The little girl obeyed, unaware that her mother was being slaughtered just a few steps below. By then, Saima had lost massive amounts of blood. Several arteries in her jugular vein were severed. Her face, head, and arm were horribly mutilated. In the frenzy, Saba herself suffered a small cut, though she barely noticed. When the killing was over, she quickly moved on to the next phase of her plan, staging the crime as a robbery gone wrong. She smashed a pane of glass on the back door to make it look like an intruder had forced entry. Then she stripped off her bloodied clothing, stuffed it into a plastic bag along with the knife, Saima's phone, and some jewelry, and hid the items in her bedroom. Calmly, she showered, washing away the evidence of Saima's blood. Only after cleaning herself up did she call her parents and then dial emergency services. When her family rushed home, they were met with a nightmare. Saima lay in the hallway in a pool of blood, her life gone. The brutality of the scene shocked even the paramedics. The wounds were so severe that police initially believed the killer must have been a man. The first step for investigators was to question the only adult who had been in the house that night, Saima's younger sister, Saima Khan. She recited her version of events with a calm, almost practiced tone. She explained, that evening, everyone else had been out. Her parents, brothers, and brother-in-law Hafiz had gone to a funeral at the mosque. While Saima had gone to work, Saba had stayed behind to watch the children. She told detectives that she had put the children to bed, though the youngest had fussed a little, prompting her to message Saima and ask her to come home sooner. By the time the baby fell asleep, Saba said she saw Saima's car pull into the driveway. Relieved, she decided to take a shower. According to her story, moments later, she heard a loud noise and her sister's screams. Throwing on a robe, she rushed downstairs and found Saima lying bloodied in the hallway. That was when she insisted. She phoned her parents and then called emergency services. When officers asked about the cut on her hand, she claimed she had injured herself on shards of glass near the broken back door. She said she hadn't seen or heard any intruder on the surface. Her explanation seemed plausible. The smashed glass, the missing jewelry, and the horrific scene were consistent with a violent burglary. Yet, detectives couldn't ignore the details that didn't add up. Saba's demeanor struck them as oddly detached, almost rehearsed. Given the brutality of what had just happened, her lack of visible grief or panic raised quiet suspicions. Though investigators reminded themselves that people cope with trauma in different ways, still, one fact remained clear. This was no ordinary crime. The sheer ferocity of the attack, dozens of stab wounds, the attempt to mutilate, did not resemble a panicked burglar. It looked personal. It looked like vengeance. The entire family experienced incredible grief from losing a loved one. Hafiz was beside himself. He spoke about how their shared dream of moving into a new apartment with their 4 children had been cruelly destroyed. Both he and Saima had been counting down the days to that move, looking forward to starting a happier chapter together. Now, that future had been stolen from them forever. Relatives, friends, and even police officers pleaded with the public for any information that might help track down the killer who had ripped away the life of a devoted mother. The whole community of Luton and the surrounding areas was shaken to its core. Hafiz himself gave an emotional statement, saying their family's hearts had been torn to pieces. What he didn't know at the time was that the true motive behind Saima's murder was tied to his own secret. The autopsy results painted a horrific picture. Saima had been stabbed 68 times. Forensic experts concluded that she likely died after the first few blows, but the attacker kept plunging the knife into her body again and again. Long after death, detectives were convinced this wasn't the work of a burglar. A random intruder would never waste precious time inflicting so many wounds after the victim was already gone. This was personal. This was rage. With that in mind, detectives decided to revisit the testimony of their key witness, Saima Khan. Saima had been close to her sister, and investigators wanted to hear her version of events again. During questioning, Saima told them that Saima had a dark secret, a secret lover. She even suggested that this man might have been the one to ambush and murder Saima. But instead of deflecting suspicion, her story had the opposite effect. Detectives noticed how Saima seemed almost eager to smear her sister's reputation at a time when Saima could no longer defend herself. The claim didn't sit right. Family members, neighbors, and friends had all spoken about Saima's character. They were adamant she would never cheat on Hafiz. In fact, her life revolved around her children, her husband, and her part-time job. She barely had the time, let alone the energy, to pursue an affair. Still, investigators considered every angle. Could this have been an honor killing? The sheer brutality of the attack led some to believe the perpetrator was male. To narrow down suspects, police mapped out the movements of each family member in the days before the crime and seized electronic devices from the household. It didn't take long before damning evidence began to surface. Detectives discovered that Saima had recently purchased a knife at a local supermarket, the very same model used in the attack. A review of her Google searches and phone data revealed an even darker truth. Saima had been carrying on a secret affair with Hafiz for the past 4 years. Their text messages left no doubt. Saima had often written about her hatred and resentment toward her sister, even accusing Hafiz of marrying Saima only to secure a passport. Their relationship had become so volatile that Hafiz eventually blocked her on social media. The case was unraveling quickly. On May 31, 2016, just 8 days after Saima's murder, detectives conducted a thorough search of Saba's bedroom. What they found erased any remaining doubt. Hidden inside were the pieces of jewelry supposedly stolen during the staged robbery. Even more damning, they uncovered Saima's missing phone, the blood-stained knife, and clothing Saba had worn on the night of the murder. Still soaked in Saima's blood, Saba was arrested immediately. At first, she denied having any part in Saima's death. Though she admitted to the affair with Hafiz, she tried to claim that the relationship had ended after a failed pregnancy and that she had distanced herself from him. Still, she clung to the story of a robbery gone wrong. But the irrefutable evidence found in her room made this claim difficult to support. After several rounds of interrogation, Saba finally broke down. She confessed to killing Saima. In her statement, she painted herself as a victim, saying Hafiz had manipulated her for years, even abused her physically, and that she felt trapped in a relationship with a man 10 years older, more experienced, and impossible to resist. The trial took place in October 2017, and it was there that Saima Khan finally admitted the truth. She pleaded guilty to the murder of her own sister. Prosecutors laid out the chilling details of her motive. What began as an infatuation with Hafiz Rahman had grown into a dangerous, obsessive fixation. She could no longer stand the fact that Hafiz belonged to someone else. In her mind, Saima's life looked flawless. Married, with children, and a stable home, while she herself remained in the shadows. That resentment turned into rage. Hafiz, taking the witness stand, described himself as a victim of manipulation. He admitted that he had made the grave mistake of giving in to Saba's advances, but he claimed he had been trapped by her threats. According to him, Saba often said she would harm herself if he ever left her, bombarding him with messages filled with desperate declarations of love. Despite his testimony about wanting to end things, prosecutors highlighted the undeniable fact that Hafiz had still continued sleeping with Saba. Even in the days leading up to the murder, the defense tried to shift some of the blame onto Hafiz. Saba's lawyer argued that Hafiz had taken advantage of a vulnerable young woman, one who had little experience with men and suffered from mental health struggles. He painted Saba as lonely, unstable, and desperate, reminding the court that she had a history of self-harm. According to the defense, Hafiz had strung her along for years, feeding her false hope of a future together, only to retreat when things became too complicated. Saba himself showed no remorse. Not a tear, not a trace of remorse. She sat motionless in the defendant's box, her face expressionless, her eyes hollow. It was clear she wasn't mourning Saima's stolen life. She was mourning her own freedom. Saima Khan was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. The defense immediately sought an appeal, calling the sentence excessively harsh, but the Appeals Commission disagreed. The punishment, they said, was just. And so, Saima Khan remains behind bars in Bedfordshire, UK, where she will spend the best years of her life reflecting on the crime that destroyed her family. After the trial, Hafiz released a statement. He said he could never have imagined such horror unfolding within his own family. He admitted his deep shame for betraying his wife and confessed that not a day passes without regret. Hafiz remembered Saima as a devoted wife, a loving mother of 4 beautiful children, a daughter who made her parents proud, and a sister whose kindness touched everyone around her. He sighed. Her death left a permanent wound in the hearts of everyone who loved her. For her parents, the pain was almost unbearable. Losing one daughter is tragedy enough, but learning that another daughter was responsible, that was a nightmare no family should ever endure. And that brings us to the end of this tragic story, a story of jealousy, betrayal, and a family torn apart forever. On a quiet afternoon in January, the small town in Waller County, Texas, was suddenly shaken by a scene so horrifying that even the most seasoned police officers shuddered. In a guest house located on a large plot of land owned by a wealthy family, blood was splattered on the floor, covering the walls and ceiling. In the middle of the room, the body of a young woman lay motionless, her head severed, a bloody knife thrown next to her. It was Angie, just 21 years old, an immigrant from Nicaragua with dreams of building a bright future in America. The person standing in that room, eerily calm, was her husband, Jade Dykus, 23 years old, the only son of a prestigious family in the area. How did a love story once considered the American dream turn into a terrible tragedy? Why would a young man born into wealth, raised in a powerful family, commit such a barbaric crime? This is not just a murder, but a bloody warning about the control and violence hidden behind the facade of a seemingly perfect marriage. And to understand how things spiraled into tragedy, we have to go back to the beginning, where two seemingly opposite people collided. Jade Dykus was born and raised in Waller County, Texas, just over an hour's drive from Houston. His family was famous and wealthy in the area, owning a lot of real estate and land. They lived in a large house, prominent amidst the vast farms. Previously, the family had a large house and a smaller guest house, but as he grew up, the guest house was converted into his own private residence. Jade chose to live there, realizing the dream of many young Americans by not having to rent a house. He and his young wife, Angie, have lived here together. Angie was born in Nicaragua in 2001. When she grew up, she immigrated to the United States in search of a better life. Unlike Jade, her career path was initially difficult. Angie was born into a poor family. From a young age, she witnessed financial hardship. This made her hardworking and always helping her family. She is also a calm and friendly person. When she came to America, she kept a calm attitude, liked to work to support herself and help her family. Angie dreamed of building a good future. She wanted to marry an American, to settle down and receive support. With her charming appearance and sweet personality, she attracted Jade from the first meeting. At that time, she had just moved here and did not have many friends. In just a few years, Angie found a place to live and did many things at the same time. Everyone saw that she was happy with her successes. She had many big plans for the future and believed in a good life in America, but she did not expect that she was wrong. Jade and Angie's lives intersected at the end of 2022. Those who know Jade all realized that he was attracted to Angie from the first meeting. He described her as an energetic and charming girl with whom he wanted to build a romantic relationship. Angie, on the other hand, had similar feelings and took the initiative to approach Jade. She saw in him the ideal future husband and father. Despite the cultural and language barriers, her English was not good. She took the initiative. Surprisingly, just a month after meeting, in October 2022, they announced their marriage. They held a small, private ceremony. At first glance, their story seemed like a dream come true for Angie. She had her own house in a small town, and it seemed that this girl from Nicaragua could build an ideal American family, have children, and develop a career. Jade had everything she needed to help her do that. Jade was the son of a wealthy family, had no money problems. He truly loved Angie. However, behind this perfect appearance, everything was not good. Before getting married, Angie regularly updated her social media profile, posting photos and various posts, but after getting married, the number of posts gradually decreased. She almost stopped taking photos with Jared after the wedding. Relatives began to ask about this change, because it was unlike the active and sociable girl like Angie, but she avoided these questions. Many people suspected that Jared had forbidden her to do those things. Angie just evaded, saying that there was no violence in their relationship, but admitted that her husband had an influence on her, making her emotionally exhausted. This did not surprise anyone. Although Jared's family was considered kind, many locals knew that he had a criminal record. He also had problems with banned substances and alcohol. His parents knew this, but they did not tell Angie because they believed that marriage would have a positive effect on their son and that he would give up his bad habits. However, the reality was quite the opposite. Soon after the wedding, Jared began to behave worse. The community knew Jared was prone to drunkenness, using banned substances, and behaving inappropriately. He was aggressive and often in trouble with the law. His first drunk driving arrest, compounded by threats to the police, brought him to their attention. Many believed he avoided jail only because of his wealthy parents. Some locals hoped Angie could help Jared change after the two got married. After the wedding, they moved into a large guest house on Jared's family land. The parents gave them the long unused guest house, hoping they would be comfortable and independent. However, this plan backfired on Angie, who became isolated instead of finding peace. Jared controlled her communication with her family, completely dominating her life with his family, rules, and habits. Angie, a resilient woman who had overcome many challenges since moving to the United States, viewed this as another obstacle. She had grown up in harsh conditions and worked hard to improve her life, initially arriving in Texas without documents, leading to constant fear of deportation to Nicaragua. Before the wedding, finding and registering for a job was difficult. Angie hoped marriage and legal status would ease her struggles, but Jared quickly exploited this vulnerability, pressuring her into submission. She feared losing everything she had worked for if she divorced him. Before meeting Jared, she had taken on numerous part-time jobs to make ends meet. After the wedding, she continued this relentless work ethic, waking before dawn to work at a local gym and then working at a fast food restaurant until late. Marriage did not bring the ease she had hoped for. She still had to work constantly. However, after the wedding, some jobs became irrelevant. She had to look for new part-time jobs, while Jared remained mostly unemployed. He found occasional work, but rarely stayed longer than a month. The small town likely contributed to his difficulties. Everyone knew of Jared's troubled past, making it hard for him to find steady employment. Some believed he was struggling to find his place, while others saw him as exploiting his parents' wealth. He could be charming when he wanted to be. However, this charm faded after marrying Angie, revealing his impulsiveness, insecurity, and anger. Angie was unaware of Jared's persistent behavioral problems until they became apparent after they were married. Within the first month, things changed. Angie began to withdraw from her friends and loved ones. Co-workers noticed her shift from cheerful to depressed, often seeing her crying in secret. She started wearing long sleeves, even in hot weather, as if hiding something. The situation was further complicated by the language barrier. Jared didn't speak Spanish, and Angie's English was limited. Eventually, her inner circle realized that Jared had become her de facto translator, her only link to the outside world, a role he manipulated for his own benefit. He began to control and dominate her. Even as his banned substance use increased, he would leave home and return late at night. Neighbors began to hear their loud arguments and screaming. In public, Angie acted as if everything was fine, She didn't share her problems, kept working hard, and avoided discussing her family life. Many people suspect she was abused both physically and mentally, but she has never confirmed it. She often showed her forearms without bruises, despite wearing long sleeves. She explained her new preference for modest clothing as a response to her husband's jealousy. He didn't want other men looking at her. In late 2022, 3 months after their marriage, those close to Angie and Jared sensed deep tension. The honeymoon ended quickly. Jared, a strong and unstable young man, became increasingly dominant and showed little concern for Angie. She struggled to talk about her problems due to a language barrier and her husband's strict control. She had no family in the U.S. to rely on. They lived on Jared's family estate, and although Jared's parents could have helped, they did not intervene. Angie's co-workers, who had known her for years, noticed she had changed. She once laughed off Jared's quirks, but later confided to a few friends that he controlled her completely. She still hoped things would improve, but they didn't. She told friends Jared often came home drunk, leading to frequent arguments. Angie began arriving at work, exhausted. She continued to deny domestic violence, yet understood she was in a vulnerable position. Her family was thousands of miles away. She had no car, little support, and her immigration status made her fearful and dependent on Jared. His parents also noticed changes in him. He grew withdrawn, irritable, and aggressive. They felt Angie pushed back against his behavior rather than trying to control him, but still did nothing. Believing the relationship would eventually make Jared more responsible, they think Angie and Jared just need time. Perhaps Jared's parents felt more at ease because Angie and Jared lived nearby, and their quarrels seemed to be nothing more than shouting. No one had seen physical violence. Angie believed Jared's behavior was driven by alcohol and banned substances, which made him paranoid and aggressive. By the end of 2022, Angie told a friend she was determined to help Jared return to normal. Loyal and supportive by nature, she didn't want to give up, but the crisis continued. In early January 2023, she posted a short video on social media. She was drinking coffee alone, listening to music, and appeared happier by herself than with her husband. The post had a brief, reflective caption. Tragically, she had only days left to live. The morning of January 11, 2023, began like any other. For months, she had followed the same routine. Wake up, eat breakfast, get ready for work, and post a photo of her meal online. Later that day, Jared came home drunk. An argument started and ended abruptly. Around 5 p.m., Jared went to his parents' main house and calmly told them he had a problem. He asked them to come to the guest house where he lived with Angie. The moment they stepped inside, they were horrified. Angie's body lay on the living room floor. She had been decapitated. Blood covered the floors, walls, and even the ceiling. A blood-stained kitchen knife lay nearby, shaken but resolute. Jared's parents did not protect him. They immediately called 911. When police arrived at the guest house, they were stunned by the brutality. Even seasoned officers had never seen such a gruesome scene in their quiet town. Jared was present. He neither fled nor denied responsibility. He confessed to killing his wife, speaking with a disturbing lack of emotion. The police believed Jared was in a compromised state, possibly drunk, high, or experiencing mental health issues. Detectives reconstructed the timeline to understand what led to the tragedy, focusing on Jared's actions before he attacked his wife, Angie. Surveillance cameras showed Jared entering several stores around the city. In one, he walked in barefoot and bought a case of beer. The salesman later said he looked strange but not aggressive. Then he went home, where Angie was waiting. Jared claimed Angie was upset with him, and they argued again. He couldn't clearly remember how the violence began. He said her anger was tied to jealousy and job issues, and he believed he had seen an inappropriate text on her phone. However, a review of Angie's phone found no incriminating messages. She had been texting a co-worker about plans for later that day. Regardless, Jared, under the influence of alcohol and banned substance, became enraged. The situation escalated quickly. Jared grabbed a kitchen knife and attacked Angie. She suffered multiple stab and slash wounds. She showed little sign of defensive injuries, suggesting Jared may have attacked without warning. The medical examiner concluded that when the beheading began, Angie was likely already dead or unconscious from blood loss. The attempted dismemberment intensified the brutality of the crime. It wasn't to hide the body. It appeared intended to desecrate the victim. Forensic teams spent a long time collecting evidence throughout the blood-soaked guest house. They found Angie's head on the floor in a nearby room and gathered dozens of evidence, samples. Blood drops and splatters were everywhere. Examiners confirmed that a common kitchen knife was used for both the murder and the decapitation. Detectives were shocked by Jared's demeanor. He showed no remorse when speaking with police. Jared recounted the graphic details without hesitation or emotion. He even tried to minimize his responsibility, claiming Angie had insulted him, an argument untenable. Given the manner of her death, Angie's body was sent for autopsy, and her family in Nicaragua was notified. Tragically, her family could not afford to travel to the United States or repatriate her remains. The local community responded with compassion and organized a fundraiser. Residents were horrified by the cruelty of the crime and questioned whether it could have been prevented. Strikingly, the crime occurred just a short distance from Jared's parents' home, yet they did not intervene. Jared was taken into custody and cooperated with numerous interrogations. He confessed at the scene and later repeated his account in detail at the station. Even while describing the beheading of his 21-year-old wife, he remained calm, with a soft, even voice, treating the killing as if it were routine. He said their relationship had always involved jealousy and control. He claimed there was no love. He believed she wanted legal stability in the country, and he wanted intimacy. When describing the murder, Jared said that in his rage he felt detached, as if someone else were committing the act, suggesting possible mental issues. Investigators, however, concluded the facts pointed to premeditated murder, not mental illness or intoxication. His actions were deliberate. Notably, before going to his parents to tell them Angie was dead, Jared showered, changed clothes, and then went to a store to buy more alcohol. After confessing, Jared was charged with first-degree murder and held on $500,000 bail. He couldn't afford it, and his parents refused to pay. He was admitted to a mental health monitoring unit due to concerns he might try to harm himself, and was placed under closer supervision. His attorney pursued an insanity defense from the start and requested psychiatric evaluations. While Jared awaited trial, multiple assessments of his mental state were conducted. Preliminary hearings were set for early 2024. Prosecutors argued Jared was competent to stand trial, while the defense sought independent evaluations. Throughout 2023, local residents who cared about Angie held vigils, joined by her colleagues and friends, all describing her as a bright, positive person who did not deserve such a fate. Her body was eventually returned to Nicaragua, where her family held the funeral. Meanwhile, Jared's family has cooperated with the police from the beginning. They were shocked by what he had done and were in regular contact with investigators. For a time, they were even considered possible participants in the abuse Angie suffered, but that suspicion was quickly dismissed. It became clear they had noticed warning signs, but did not recognize their seriousness. hoping marriage would help their son. 4 months after the wedding, Angie was murdered. Neighbors provided valuable information, reporting frequent, heated arguments between the couple. Rumors circulated that the relationship was mutually abusive. A nearby neighbor said he heard their last major argument a few days before the killing. The relationship appeared very toxic. Community members spoke out about the tragedy, noting cultural differences between immigrants and native-born Americans, and warning that rushing into marriage can be an alarming sign. Still, the debate changed little. Despite Jared's confession, the motive for the murder and beheading remained unclear. Many believed substance abuse and untreated mental illness were major factors. This reignited discussions about early detection and intervention for such problems. Jared awaited trial in jail. Prosecutors said they would seek the maximum penalty under Texas law, including the death penalty. The defense leaned heavily on an insanity plea, suggesting Jared had an undiagnosed mental illness. He was described as emotionally unstable, with a long history of banned substance use and likely untreated mental health issues. Prosecutors argued the insanity defense would fail, pointing to Jared's calm demeanor and apparent awareness after the crime as signs of premeditation. They also revealed he had been arrested in November 2022 for drunk driving and released on bail. Citing public safety concerns, they asked to double his $500,000 bail. The judge agreed, and Jared remained in custody following the trial. 23 years old, Jared Dykus was sentenced to 40 years in prison. With eligibility for parole after 20 years, he will be eligible in 2043. Meanwhile, Angie's loved ones in Nicaragua continue to mourn her loss. Thanks to fundraising efforts, her family was able to bring her body home. Her mother gave a Spanish-language interview on a local television channel, tearfully describing Angie as responsible, bright, and devoted to her family. Angie worked tirelessly in the United States and regularly sent money back home. She had dreamed of becoming a nurse. Angie was especially worried about her aunt, who had cancer and lacked access to treatment. Helping her aunt was one of the reasons Angie traveled to the United States. Her story highlights how vulnerable immigration status can make someone. She faced language barriers, struggled to protect herself, and could not fully access support from law enforcement. Jared's actions also devastated his own family. His parents were accused of neglect and indifference, but they insisted they never imagined their son could commit what they call the most brutal crime in Waller County's history. A loud argument broke out in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Neighbors were used to the screams coming from the house, but tonight it was different. The sounds of screaming, banging, and muffled sobbing grew louder, as if signaling something was about to go too far. Then, just a few minutes later, a call came through the emergency line. The voice on the other end was shaky and broken, as if the caller was in a state of confusion and despair. It was the beginning of one of the most controversial cases the town of Dubuque had ever seen. Dubuque, a city stretched along the banks of the Mississippi River, at first glance looks like a classic Midwestern town with rolling hills, historic districts, and postcard charm. But beneath that surface lies a complicated history. For decades, Dubuque was known as a stronghold of a notorious hate group with deep roots in the region. In the 1922, the group was highly influential, organizing rallies, pressuring local officials, and gaining open support from many white residents. This troubling legacy left scars on the city's social fabric. Entire neighborhoods were divided along racial lines. African American families were pushed into specific areas, and for years, schools and jobs remained largely inaccessible to minorities. Even into the late 20th century, federal reports listed Dubuque as one of the least welcoming places in the country for Black Americans. During the 1,982nd and 1,992nd, tensions flared again. Threatening graffiti appeared, homes were targeted with arson, and city leaders were forced to roll out anti-discrimination programs. Still, even in the 21st century, hostility lingered. From street-level aggression to inflammatory posts online, the contrast between Dubuque's picturesque image and its deeper social struggles has always been striking. On one side, historic churches, a respected university, and breathtaking views of the Mississippi. On the other, a legacy of racial intolerance, social friction, and long-standing mistrust between communities. It was in this atmosphere of prejudice and unspoken conflict that a story unfolded, one that would soon draw national attention. Fontainebleau grew up in Dubuque in a well-regarded family, was known from a young age for his love of sports and natural social charisma. His confidence and charm made him a popular figure among his friends throughout high school and into college. Samantha Link's story was different. Raised in a household that valued hard work, discipline, she turned to athletics early on, pushing herself to prove her strength and determination. In her teens, she was diagnosed with mental health conditions that required ongoing medical supervision and daily medication. While the treatments helped her maintain balance, they also caused mood swings, occasional irritability. She had also endured difficult past relationships marked by control and emotional pressure. That history left deep scars, a fear of losing control, a constant need for reassurance. Outwardly, though, Samantha appeared energetic, someone with clear goals and the willpower to chase them. They first met at a party hosted by their mutual friend Cassie. The night was filled with music and laughter, a seemingly ordinary gathering that turned into a pivotal moment. Fonte was in his element, cracking jokes, drawing people in with his charm. Samantha watched him with a mix of caution and curiosity. When they finally spoke, it quickly became clear they shared similar interests and values. It was obvious something was sparking between them. Within days, casual texts and evening walks blossomed into something more serious. Before long, they decided to move in together. Their friends were surprised at how quickly things escalated. It was as if they had skipped the getting-to-know-you stage entirely and jumped straight into a full-blown commitment. But under one roof, their differences became hard to ignore. Samantha craved stability and a calm home environment where her emotional well-being was prioritized. Fonte, however, clung to his familiar lifestyle, late nights, parties, and constant outings with friends. What felt like neglect to her seemed completely normal to him. Initially, their differences seemed like complementary opposites, creating a fragile sense of balance. However, as time passed, their different needs created problems in the relationship. Their contrasting ideas about what a partnership meant slowly damaged their connection. To outsiders, they still looked like the picture-perfect couple. Fonte, the charismatic figure who drew attention everywhere he went, and Samantha, the quiet, grounding presence at his side. But those closer to them began to notice early red flags. Samantha grew increasingly uneasy about Fonte's openness with other women. He, in turn, brushed off her concerns with laughter, dismissing them as jealousy, which only deepened her distrust. On the surface, their relationship remained intact. They still talked about the future, stood by each other during difficult times, and tried to maintain closeness. But beneath that facade, tension was quietly building. For Samantha, being with Fonte meant a chance at stability, a reliable partner she could depend on. For him, it was more about excitement, attention, and connection. These mismatched intentions became increasingly obvious to those around them. The strain soon began to take its toll. Samantha's life was tightly bound to her medication schedule and regular medical checkups. But Fonte didn't always take this seriously. He believed his role was to support her during the hard moments, but not to structure his entire life around her needs. Minor frustrations began to stack up. His tardiness, broken promises, and carefree acceptance of party invitations even when she wasn't feeling well. Her sharp reactions often sounded to him like relentless criticism, which he dismissed as overdramatic. She asked more frequently about their future, hoping for reassurance. While he deflected, unwilling to commit to specifics, her anxiety grew, and with it, his irritation. Still, the bond between them didn't disappear. This push and pull, deep attachment, mixed with rising frustration, became the defining pattern of their relationship. After yet another heated argument, Samantha left to stay with her mother, hoping distance would give her clarity. Eventually, though, they agreed to return home together. The car ride back was suffocating, long stretches of silence broken by bursts of blame. Neither wanted to be the first to back down. For Fonte, this reconciliation felt like a crossroads. He was beginning to realize the relationship had reached its breaking point. Samantha, on the other hand, couldn't hide her anger and pressed him relentlessly, escalating every conversation. Back at the house, peace was short-lived. Within hours, another argument erupted. Samantha demanded proof of his commitment, pleading for reassurance that he was serious about a long-term future. Fonte answered with cold detachment, saying her expectations were unrealistic and that he felt trapped by her demands. Soon after, he made a decision. Ending the relationship was, in his mind, the only way to escape the emotional weight pressing down on him. He told her directly he no longer saw a future for them. For Samantha, the breakup was devastating. She had built her stability around him and wasn't ready to let go. As emotions spiraled, a new blow landed. A video posted by Fonte. Speaking directly to his audience, he made remarks that could easily be interpreted as thinly veiled references to their problems. To Samantha, it felt like mockery, his way of dismissing her and airing their struggles in public. For her, it was undeniable proof he had no intention of reconciling. What began as emotional strain quickly escalated into confrontation. During one heated dispute, Fonte reportedly told Samantha he wanted her out of the house, that her presence had become unbearable. This wasn't just a moment of anger. That moment marked a critical tipping point. With his video circulating and their fights intensifying, the fragile balance between them was about to shatter. Later, Fonte claimed that after their heated argument, Samantha, overwhelmed and emotionally unstable, impulsively grabbed a kitchen knife and injured herself. He insisted it was an act of self-harm, not violence from him. According to his account, he even tried to stop her but failed. But the scene first responders encountered told a very different story. Paramedics arrived to find Samantha lifeless on the kitchen floor, bearing 3 stab wounds to vital areas. The placement of her body and the nature of the wounds simply did not align with Fonte's version. While medics worked desperately to save her, officers observed Fonte closely. What they saw was not shock or grief, but hostility. Witnesses later recalled him shouting at police, arguing with them, and displaying aggressive, confrontational behavior. To officers, it was a clear signal this was no mere domestic dispute. It was something far more serious. Once in custody, Fonte's statements immediately raised red flags. When pressed for details about the timing of events and his exact actions, his answers were vague, inconsistent, and often shifted under scrutiny. Detectives quickly suspected he was concealing the truth. Then came the most damning discovery: his phone. A recording captured just before the incident revealed a tense atmosphere filled with threats and aggression from Fonte. Far from calm or composed, his voice dripped with hostility. The tone of the video stood in stark contrast to his claim that he had only tried to protect Samantha, shredding his credibility. Text messages recovered from the device added another layer. They showed days of heated arguments, accusations, and emotional tension. The incident was clearly the culmination of ongoing turmoil. Medical examiners reinforced this conclusion. They determined Samantha's injuries were consistent with a violent struggle, not self-inflicted wounds. The angle, depth, and force of the stabs made the prospect of self-harm virtually impossible. Investigators gathered more evidence from neighbors and nearby security cameras. Multiple residents reported hearing terrified screams that night. Every new piece of testimony pointed away from self-harm and toward a brutal confrontation. Fonte's explanation now looked less like truth and more like a hastily constructed defense. From the very beginning, Samantha's family had voiced their doubts. They told investigators she had never expressed self-harm thoughts and was focused on her future. Her mother, especially, emphasized that Samantha had plans, goals, and no history of impulsive self-harm. Their testimony directly contradicted Fonte's attempt to paint her as unstable. As the investigation deepened, public reaction intensified. Local media covered the story closely, and on social media, outrage spread rapidly. Many in the community saw Fonte's narrative as a desperate attempt to deflect blame. For Samantha's loved ones, it was not just about disproving his claims, it was about demanding justice. What began as a domestic dispute had now escalated into one of the most scrutinized criminal cases in the area. Each revelation fueled public anger and strengthened the resolve of Samantha's family, ensuring the case would not fade quietly, but remain a test of truth, justice, and accountability. A series of meticulous forensic examinations were commissioned in an effort to clarify the circumstances of the tragedy. Medical specialists carefully assessed the wounds sustained by Samantha Link, noting striking details. The injuries varied in depth, direction, and force, suggesting multiple blows delivered during a struggle. Psychological evaluations added further weight to the findings. Records showed that Samantha had never been diagnosed with a serious mental disorder, nor was she under ongoing psychiatric observation. There was no documented history of instability that could support the claim she had acted in a sudden breakdown. These conclusions marked a turning point in the investigation. Combined with the digital evidence and testimony from friends and neighbors, they dismantled the defense's early narrative. The consensus among experts was unequivocal. The theory that Samantha harmed herself was implausible. For prosecutors, it was the foundation they needed to push the case toward trial with renewed confidence. When the trial of Fonte Buello commenced in Rockwell County, Texas, anticipation was high. Locals were unfamiliar with such a sensational case. The court was packed with onlookers, reporters, and local residents eager to witness the proceedings. The judge presided, a figure known for his rigid style and no-nonsense rulings. His choice to restrict discussion about Samantha's prior psychological consultations sparked immediate debate. By prohibiting references to her visits with mental health professionals, he effectively blocked the jury from hearing evidence that might have offered a fuller understanding of her emotional state. Many legal observers criticized the ruling as a limitation that tilted the balance of the case. In the courtroom, the prosecution leaned heavily on science. They highlighted bruises on Samantha's arms and shoulders, injuries that clearly pointed to restraint or physical conflict. rather than voluntary harm. Crime scene photographs revealed a kitchen in disarray, with blood patterns that supported the scenario of a violent struggle. These details left jurors with a vivid image of the chaos that had unfolded. The defense countered with a familiar strategy, portraying Fonte as a man trapped in an escalating situation. They argued he had acted in self-defense after Samantha lashed out during an emotional outburst. Text messages were presented as evidence of her volatility. But those arguments were steadily eroded by witnesses who painted a different picture. Samantha's friends testified she was looking ahead, discussing a new job opportunity and planning an upcoming trip. Evidence that directly contradicted claims she was unstable or preparing to harm herself. The most dramatic moment came when prosecutors played an audio recording recovered from Fonte's phone. His voice could be heard, sharp and cutting. To the prosecution, this was the sound of frustration boiling over, a precursor to violence. The defense tried to minimize its significance, calling it a casual remark taken out of context. However, both the jury and the public seemed to interpret the recording as part of a larger pattern of tension and conflict. Meanwhile, Fonte's conduct on the stand left jurors uneasy. He stumbled over timelines, contradicted earlier statements, and often refused to give direct answers. Each inconsistency further damaged his credibility, reinforcing the prosecution's portrait of a man trying to obscure the truth rather than reveal it. As proceedings dragged on, the divide between prosecution and defense sharpened. One side presented a case built on consistency, expert testimony, and hard evidence. The other leaned on speculation and selective interpretation. But the most decisive battles took place behind closed doors. Jury deliberations quickly grew heated, with members split between doubt and certainty. Some pressed for conviction, citing the overwhelming medical evidence, while others hesitated, swayed by lingering questions. Reports later surfaced of intense internal pressure. A letter written by juror admitted he felt coerced, not only by more assertive jurors, but also by the judge, who repeatedly urged them to reach consensus rather than deadlock. The judge's role itself became a focal point. Far from remaining neutral, he was seen pushing the jury toward unity, interrupting defense attorneys, and shutting down lines of questioning that might have benefited Fonte. Journalists covering the trial described a courtroom where judicial authority sometimes overshadowed fairness, creating an imbalance that would later resurface during appeals. The public's interest in the case intensified outside the courthouse. Samantha's family spoke often to the media, portraying her as a victim of manipulation and violence, and Fonte as the perpetrator. Local newspapers published emotional stories about Samantha's last days, with quotes from friends, family highlighting her kindness and strength. A critical moment arrived when previously undisclosed messages from Samantha's personal conversations were introduced in court. These texts revealed her intention to leave the relationship and focus on building a new future for herself. For prosecutors, it was devastating to the defense's claims. Any suggestion that she was unstable or incapable of making decisions collapsed under the weight of her own words. The jury was no longer weighing competing versions of events. They were already considering the severity of the punishment. Internal pressure within the jury room and the judge's firm stance had shifted the momentum firmly toward the prosecution. After weeks of testimony, forensic evidence, and conflicting legal arguments, the courtroom braced for the final moment. The atmosphere was tense enough to silence the crowd. The judge read the verdict aloud. Fonte was found guilty of the charges against Samantha Link and sentenced to 50 years in prison. A heavy silence filled the room, followed by a wave of mixed reactions. Fonte didn't outwardly panic upon hearing the sentence, but the strain on his face was unmistakable. He had denied responsibility throughout the trial, and even in the face of the final ruling, he continued to maintain his innocence. His immediate response was to announce plans to appeal the decision, claiming that the evidence had been misinterpreted and that the full context of that night had not been fairly considered. Samantha's family was visibly relieved by the verdict. They felt justice had been served, though they still grieved an irreplaceable loss. Family members in the courtroom cried openly, thanked the prosecutors and the court, expressing that the verdict brought them a long-awaited sense of closure. Public reaction, however, was far more divided. Many believed the sentence was just and reflected the strength of the evidence presented. Others questioned the fairness of the trial, arguing that media pressure and courtroom imbalances had stacked the odds against Fonte from the beginning. His supporters pointed to specific grievances, such as the controversial removal of a juror and restrictions imposed on defense, claiming the process was tainted and should have been declared a mistrial. In the weeks following sentencing, the community itself split into camps. Some viewed Fonte as a manipulative offender who had finally been held accountable. Others saw him as a man condemned by a system, eager for a conviction. Advocacy groups began forming, calling for a review of the case, while counter-voices argued that the evidence was overwhelming and that reopening the matter would only prolong the suffering of Samantha's family. Rather than closing the book, the verdict ignited a fresh round of debate. To his critics, Fonte embodied cold-blooded violence. To his supporters, he was another casualty of a flawed judicial system. His attorneys moved quickly, filing notices of appeal and alleging serious procedural missteps. They argued that video footage used in court had been stripped of context, twisting casual remarks into sinister threats. They also claimed investigators had targeted Fonte as the prime suspect from the beginning. Refusing to explore other possibilities, the appeals court agreed to review the case, but the process promised to be long and arduous. Meanwhile, Fonte remained behind bars, his supporters organizing rallies and online campaigns in his name. To some, it was a fight for justice. To others, it was nothing more than a desperate attempt to rewrite a verdict that had already been decided. As preparations for the appeal advanced, the defense team brought in independent experts to bolster their version of events. Forensic psychologists and criminal investigators were introduced, some of whom argued that, under extreme emotional distress, the wounds on Samantha's body could be interpreted as self-inflicted. Another specialist pointed out that there were no direct eyewitnesses to the fatal altercation, suggesting the jury had relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. The prosecution quickly countered with its own battery of experts. They emphasized the directionality of blood spatter, the precise angles of the wounds, and the position of Samantha's body in the kitchen, all details that strongly indicated the injuries had been inflicted by someone else. Meanwhile, the media shifted its focus beyond the courtroom, digging into the couple's personal history. Old social media posts resurfaced. Friends and co-workers were interviewed, and new details began to circulate. Some accounts portrayed Samantha as someone who had voiced repeated concerns about Fonte's temper and controlling behavior. Others painted a different picture, describing her as impulsive and occasionally volatile during moments of stress. The result was a battle of interpretations, not just between lawyers, but also among experts, journalists, and the public. Some professionals argued that the case had leaned too heavily on inference and lacked a definitive smoking gun. Others maintained that the convergence of evidence, from forensic findings to text messages, made the guilty verdict both justified and necessary. This division transformed the trial into more than just a legal proceeding. It became a cultural flashpoint. Talk shows debated it nightly, editorials dissected every new revelation, and online forums buzzed with arguments from both sides. By now, the case had transcended the courtroom. Investigative journalists kept the story alive with follow-up reports, some uncovering financial disputes related to Samantha's estate, others highlighting conflicts within her family. Social media intensified the polarization, with advocacy groups springing up in support of Fonte, convinced he was the victim of a miscarriage of justice, while opposing groups rallied to defend the verdict as a long-overdue act of accountability. In the end, the saga of Fonte and Samantha became more than the tragic story of two people. It stood as one of the most polarizing legal battles of its time, a case that revealed cracks in the justice system, stirred debates within professional circles, and split public opinion down the middle. Long after the courtroom lights dimmed, the case remained etched into collective memory, both as a cautionary tale and as a cultural mirror reflecting society's deepest divisions. Binghamton, a small, peaceful city in New York State, was once so safe that many families did not need to lock their doors when they went to bed. Children rode their bikes, delivered newspapers, played in the parks. Adults lived slowly and trusted each other. In that place, crime seems a distant thing. But on the afternoon of March 26, 1984, that peace was shattered. A 12-year-old girl disappeared on a familiar street while delivering newspapers. The whole city was in a panic. Hundreds of people rushed to search for her, but to no avail. Until the police opened the door, leading to a dark basement in a seemingly innocuous house, they were faced with a gruesome sight. The girl's body lay there, wrapped in an old blanket, with traces of the crime imprinted on the walls. From that moment on, Binghamton was no longer mentioned as a peaceful city. So, who was the killer, and how could such horror hide behind the walls of an ordinary home? To find the answer, stay with us until the very end of this video. Cherry Lindsay was born on June 6, 1971, in Binghamton, New York, USA. She was one of 4 children. Her father worked in law enforcement, and her mother was a homemaker. Since childhood, she has been a creative, dynamic person and actively participates in community activities. She played the clarinet in the school orchestra, enjoyed board games and softball, and even joined the school's softball team. Despite her busy schedule, she also volunteers at the neonatal unit of a local hospital and volunteers with the American Veterans Association. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, neonatologist, or nurse, and she studied and worked hard toward those goals. At age 12, she was in 7th grade and earning good grades. In her free time, Cherry took a part-time job delivering newspapers because she wanted to help others. She planned to save her earnings to throw a party for her favorite teacher, who was expecting a baby. By early 1984, she had been delivering newspapers for about a month. Following a regular route along 2 neighboring streets near her home, residents appreciated her reliability and politeness. She always delivered on time. In the 1,980 seconds, Binghamton was considered a safe city, and many people didn't lock their doors or windows. Cherry's family lives in an area with a low crime rate. Still, her mother often accompanied her on paper routes, and her father, a police officer, encouraged people to be vigilant. On Monday, March 26, 1984, Cherry's mother stayed home to prepare a special dinner and couldn't accompany her. Cherry came home after school and left to deliver papers around 3:30 p.m., promising to return in about an hour so she could call a friend. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. Her mother later carried lifelong guilt for letting her go alone that day. At 4:30 p.m., the phone rang. It was a neighbor boy, a friend of Cherry's, asking to speak with her. Realizing that Cherry hadn't returned as promised, and knowing how punctual she always was, her mother grew concerned. She tried to stay calm, thinking that Cherry might have lost track of time while talking to someone, but she informed her husband. He immediately notified fellow officers to be vigilant and report anything unusual. Following his instructions, Cherry's mother began calling her daughter's friends and relatives. They checked with Cherry's aunt, to whom she was very close, but she hadn't seen her. An hour passed with no news. No one knows where Cherry is, and her parents are very worried. No one had seen Cherry since she left on her regular paper route. Her father and other officers couldn't wait any longer. They began searching the area, focusing on the 2 streets where she usually walked. They also spoke with people along the route, including Cherry's friends. Her best friend reported that they had seen each other from across the street earlier that day and exchanged a quick wave. Cherry stayed focused on her deliveries and didn't stop to chat. This sighting helped investigators narrow down the timeline of her disappearance. The last time anyone saw Cherry was around 4:00 p.m. She was alone, and witnesses noticed nothing unusual. Some people assumed she had gone to visit friends and would return soon. Her parent disagreed. She was a homebody, never went out without permission, and all her belongings were still in her room. By 7:00 p.m., her father, himself a police officer, and other officers had interviewed most residents on the 2 streets where Cherry usually delivered newspapers. They found nothing useful. That evening, the police department alerted the entire city, bringing more officers into the search. By the next morning, firefighters, county and state police, Kminusnina units, and a police helicopter joined in. The search area expanded into the outskirts, but no trace of Cherry was found. Her father was one of the most active searchers. He frequently called home, hoping Cherry had returned, and it was all a misunderstanding. Each time, his wife tearfully told him there was no news, until she remembered something important. She recalled that during her paper route, Cherry was afraid of a house 7 blocks away. A man there always stared at her in a way that gave her goosebumps. Cherry mentioned it to her mother repeatedly. Her father took this lead seriously. Police went to the house, but no one answered the door, and it seemed empty. Without cause to force entry, they had to leave. He kept the address in mind. About 30 hours of unsuccessful searching passed. With no new information, police held a press conference to draw public attention. Several tips came in, but all were dead ends. Soon after, the previously absent resident of that house appeared. Detectives went to see him. He is James Wales, 35 years old. He lives a quiet, normal life and rarely attracts attention. He remembered Cherry, who had delivered his papers, but said he hadn't seen her in days and didn't know where she was. There was no basis to arrest him, but detectives found him unsettling and took interest. With no other leads, they began to focus on him. News of the suspicious resident spread. A local journalist visited James, who let him in and answered questions about Cherry, though he seemed reluctant and quickly grew nervous. The journalist reported his concerns to police on March 27, 1984. Cherry's father ran a records check on James. He had no serious criminal history, only prior incidents of drunk driving and trespassing. The trespassing occurred years earlier when, drunk after leaving a bar, he wandered into a field a few kilometers from home. No one was harmed, and he received a warning. A deeper look revealed something more troubling. Years before Cherry went missing, James lived in Normandy, New York. The files show that the parents of a boy once filed a complaint alleging that James committed abuse. The case was transferred to social services and then closed without law enforcement action. He was never charged. These findings increased suspicion that he might be involved in Cherry's disappearance. Detectives met with him again. They noted he was unusually nervous, dodged direct questions, and avoided eye contact, especially when asked about Cherry, further heightening their concern. Despite James denying he saw Cherry on the day she disappeared, detectives brought him to the station for formal questioning. There, detectives found James uncomfortable communicating, unwilling to cooperate, and almost immediately requested a lawyer. While James was being questioned, his wife also spoke to the police. Convinced that her husband had nothing to do with Cherry's disappearance, she agreed to have her home searched. Investigators soon found a paper bag matching the one Cherry used for her newspapers and Cherry's earrings in a dresser drawer. 2 hours later, the search continued. A detective went down to the basement and discovered what looked like dried blood. In the back of the room, they found a blanket wrapped around a girl's body. It was 12 years old, Cherry Lindsay. She was dead. Meanwhile, at the station, James continued to deny any involvement. James admitted he knew Cherry. Like other neighbors, he received newspapers from her and described her as very punctual. He offered nothing else. When informed about the discovery in his home, he stopped cooperating. Detectives believed his resistance wouldn't last. About 90 minutes later, James confessed. He said Cherry had delivered the newspaper and he lured her inside. She screamed immediately. He tried to silence her by covering her mouth, but she fought back and he began strangling her. As Cherry struggled harder, he grew enraged, grabbed a table leg, and struck her head several times. She lost consciousness, but was still alive. He tied her hands behind her back, stuffed her t-shirt in her mouth, opened the basement door, and threw her down the stairs. Cherry sustained more injuries in the fall. James followed her downstairs, wrapped a clothesline around her neck, and continued strangling her for several minutes. When she showed no signs of life, he abused her without removing the rope. He claimed he had not intended to kill her and blamed the attack on uncontrollable, impulsive violence. He then returned to his routine, finished cooking dinner, and went back to the basement. About 15 minutes later, unsure if Cherry was dead, he used the rope still around her neck to make certain. He hung her from a sewer pipe for about half an hour. Afterward, he wrapped her body, clothes, and some belongings in a blanket, collected her newspapers and the money she had earned that day, showered, changed, and removed the clothes he had worn during the crime. He went to the basement several more times to check if she was dead. His calm, detached description of these actions suggested a complete lack of remorse. Ironically, 35 years old, James was the same man who had helped Cherry with her paper route. Though Cherry had found him creepy and strange and was wary of him, he had shown her the route for delivering newspapers. Investigators now suspect this was part of a plan to gain her trust and lure her to her death. To understand how he came to commit such a crime, police examined his background. They quickly learned James's life was marked by violence. His father died when he was young. His stepfather was abusive and drank heavily. His mother, also an alcoholic, joined in punishing him rather than protecting him. James started drinking in school and later used illegal substances. James was a troubled teenager who repeatedly tried to flee his abusive parents. Despite multiple reports of domestic violence, law enforcement took no action. At 17, he finally escaped from his mother and stepfather and enlisted in the United States of America Army. He served for 6 years and earned honors and awards. He returned to Norway in 1972 and married 3 times. His last wife was Sue Ellen. They had 2 children and, for a time, lived a normal life. After leaving the army, he worked at International Business Machines but lost his job in 1983 due to long-standing alcohol and banned substance abuse. After being fired, his mental health deteriorated. His wife tried to support him, but they never sought professional help. He displayed paranoia and delusions, yet no official diagnosis was made, and he received no treatment. According to his wife and witnesses, he was a ticking time bomb, warnings that went unheeded until it was too late. Investigators later discovered that James had an unexpected accomplice. He had not forced Cherry into his house. She went there willingly. However, her family insisted that she would never have gone with such a suspicious man of her own accord. James had used his 11-year-old stepson, Brian. Knowing approximately when Cherry delivered newspapers, James watched for a moment when she was alone. When he saw her without her mother, he told Brian to help. Brian, who knew Cherry, invited her inside. During police questioning, Brian admitted that James had ordered him to do this. As soon as Cherry entered, James appeared and told Brian to leave. The boy ran to his upstairs room. He feared something terrible would happen, but stayed silent out of fear. After James confessed to the murder, police returned to the house to gather corroborating evidence in case he later recanted. Inside, they found Cherry's newspapers and the money she had collected, both stolen by James. Blood on the basement floor and wall indicated she had been beaten and thrown down the stairs. They recovered a blood-stained sewer pipe used to hang her, along with pieces of clothesline and fragments of her clothing. Evidence also showed the murder was premeditated. Before Cherry began her paper route, James did not subscribe to that newspaper. He subscribed only after she started working. Witnesses said he fixated on her, even following and observing her route. Based on this evidence, on April 6, 1984, James Wales was charged with second-degree murder, abuse, kidnapping, burglary, and abuse of a corpse. He was arrested, held in the county jail, and denied bail as a particularly dangerous offender. Unable to afford an attorney, he was assigned a public defender. The defense first sought his release on bail and requested a change of venue due to extensive local publicity that could compromise an impartial jury. Both requests were denied. The defense then filed an insanity plea. In 1984, the state governor signed a bill revising the standard for insanity defenses, shifting the burden to showing the defendant did not understand right from wrong. The attorney believed this was James's only chance to avoid a life sentence. The trial, initially set for July 30, 1984, was postponed multiple times at the defense's request. The trial finally began on October 18, 1984. The prosecutor presented detailed evidence: the rope used to strangle Cherry, a table leg with her blood, and James's confession, which he later tried to retract by claiming insanity. The evidence also included the newspapers and money he took after the murder. During the hearing, a defense psychiatrist testified that he believed James was insane, diagnosing him with intermittent explosive disorder, a relatively common condition marked by unpredictable anger and violent outbursts. At the time, about 200,000 people in the United States had been diagnosed with this disorder. According to the expert, James could not resist his impulses to do harm. The psychiatrist said that during multiple meetings with James in jail, he observed a range of disturbing symptoms. In one session, James claimed that during the murder, he believed he was attacking his mother, not Cherry. He blamed his mother for his abusive childhood, hated her, and wanted revenge. The psychiatrist concluded that James was unable to consider the consequences of his actions or control himself at the time of the crime. Two of James's ex-wives also testified. They said he had a tendency toward violence that could take disturbing forms. For example, James likes to strangle during intimacy and has a hard time stopping. The court then heard a detailed account of the murder and the horrors Cherry endured, Cherry's parents struggled to listen. The medical examiner testified that it took about 30 minutes for her to die from strangulation. Based on James's own timeline, even when he hung Cherry in the basement, she may still have been alive. Brian also testified against James. These events were deeply traumatic for 11-year-old Brian. He said he heard screams and muffled thuds. Cherry cried for help, and then it went quiet. Brian was too scared to leave the room because he knew how cruel James could be. He feared he would be attacked next. After 11 days of trial, the jury began deliberations. Notably, the jury did not see all the evidence investigators gathered. The judge excluded crime scene photos of Cherry, her torn clothing, and the marks left on her body, believing such shocking images might prevent the jury from remaining impartial. After 3 hours and 15 minutes, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The insanity defense failed. On November 12 of that year, James Wales was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 33 years, the maximum allowed by state law. In his final statement, he said he was sorry, but it sounded unconvincing. As throughout the trial, James remained impassive and showed no emotion. When issuing the sentence, the judge, citing the brutality of the crime, urged the state never to grant James parole. However, James qualified for the first time in 2017. Cherry's parents could not accept this loss. They moved out of the family home and eventually put it up for sale. By then, the house had a grim reputation. Many believed Cherry's spirit was unsettled and that strange events occurred there. The house became known as haunted. Twice, new residents abandoned it, and neighbors reported moving objects, voix, and unexplained sounds. On July 30, 2020, the ghost house was demolished. At that moment, Cherry's mother also discarded her daughter's newspaper bag, deciding it was finally time to let her go. Cherry's father, however, believed her spirit would only be at peace once the killer died behind bars. The city council honored Cherry's memory in 1984 by naming a local park after her and installing a small memorial there. James was first granted parole on April 12, 2017. Like any American inmate, he could appear before a parole board, and he exercised that right. His hearings were met with public protests organized by Cherry's parents. James told the board he struggled with stress, had a difficult childhood due to his abusive grandfather, and believed he would never have killed Cherry if not for a mental health crisis. Despite his statements, the parole board denied his release. Cherry's parents continued to hold public demonstrations, calling for him to remain imprisoned for life. Ahead of each new hearing, they intensified their efforts to seek justice for their daughter. 3 years later, James became eligible for parole again. A supporter of Cherry and her family launched an online petition that gathered more than 9,000 signatures. In total, 409 pages of signatures and 120 pages of comments were submitted to the board. James was denied parole a second time. And again, in 2023, law enforcement maintained that he should remain behind bars for life. Another hearing was scheduled for 2025. Throughout this period, Cherry's family appealed to the public, doing everything they could to prevent his release. On February 28, 2023, Cherry's father died at age 81 after a brief battle with liver cancer. Before his death, he asked that James never be released. In 2025, James was denied parole again. The next hearing is scheduled for 2 years later. Cherry's mother and others fear that in 2027, the board may consider releasing James, in part because of the terminal illness he has suffered from for years. Although the family's leading advocate, Cherry's father, has passed away, his cause continues online and in person. Many supporters, including Cherry's mother, remain determined to ensure that James is never released from prison.